listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A million MAGA hats bobbing in the center of Washington, D.C. Well, not quite a million, but that's what they called it. Some of them not just bobbing, but mobbing and rioting. There are fierce clashes going on in the U.S. Capitol as I speak. Well, they are the leaders of the democratic world, after all. Is it all over, bar the shouting in the U.S. presidential race? Or will some of those fat ladies Donald Trump sent into the Supreme Court be gargling and getting ready to sing? And who's running the United Kingdom government? Larry the Cat? Well, most people on the poll we've already got running seem to think it's Boris Johnson's latest girlfriend, somebody called Carrie Simons, that nobody ever voted for. And what about the coronavirus? What about Brexit? Big week coming up on Brexit. Will Britain make a deal with the European Union? Will that deal be a sellout of what so many people had pinned their faith and their hopes on? It's all coming up over the next 3 hours, so fasten your seatbelts. This is rock and roll radio, radio with pictures, and it's coming up now. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, coming to you all over the world, of course, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. You can listen in crystal clarity in Washington, D.C. Many on the MAGA demonstration are doing that right now. It's 105.5. Those are the magic numbers there. And you can listen on AM right across the United States from burning city to burning city. You can listen worldwide on the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But many of you, 500,000 of you again last week, watch as well as listen. And if you are doing so on Facebook, then please take this opportunity right now to share this with all of your friends on Facebook. You can watch on my Facebook page, on RT's multiple Facebook pages. You can watch on YouTube, my own, and on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter. You can watch on Instagram. You can watch on Twitch. Still haven't done so myself yet. Multiple ways to watch and to listen. But here is an open university where you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. And that's why I want your calls. We had a record number of calls last Sunday. 56 people we didn't even get round to. So get your calls in early so we know what you want to talk about. Give us your number and we will make sure you get on the show. Who's running the United Kingdom? Well, the poll numbers so far, it's running now on my poll, on my Twitter feed at George Galloway, seem to indicate that most people think that the government is currently being run by the girlfriend of Boris Johnson. People say that he has lost all decisiveness. Having known him for a long time, I can tell you he never had much in the way of decisiveness. People say that he bears the impression of the last person to sit upon him. And that's quite likely to have been Carrie Simons, if you think about it. The reality is that the Prime Minister has gone soft. He's gone soft on Brexit. At least that's all the speculation as we run up to the big week, this coming week, in the Brexit negotiations with the European Union. He's gone soft on the SNP. He's just sent them a billet doux full of flowers and kisses, in which he says he wants to start a new relationship with them. Well, of course, they, mindful of his track record on relationships, are not ready yet, at least, to tango. And we don't know exactly what Boris Johnson means by being more nice to the SNP. If he means giving more ground to them, I'm bound to tell him that this would be a grave mistake. You cannot appease a crocodile. You cannot feed people or things to the crocodile and imagine it will be sated just one person, one thing, short of you, short of breaking up Britain, against which I wholeheartedly stand, though I know many people, especially in the United States, are suckers for the Mel Gibson Braveheart appeal of breaking up our small island of English-speaking people. But I'm not and never will be. And I think that the SNP have proved over these last 13 and a half years that there is nothing you can achieve by being nice to them. What next, Boris? Hug a husky in the Arctic? Well, in a way, last night I read that the British government's plan to ban all sales of petrol and diesel new cars, which was supposed to end in 2040, which I could live with. I won't be driving anything in 2040, is about to be brought forward to 2030. Just 9 years from now, we're going to have to buy super expensive electric cars with absolutely no infrastructure present or likely to be to meet the demand in terms of charging facilities. And how they're going to produce the electricity for tens of millions, scores of millions of cars in Britain. How is that going to help the planet? I got to tell you, I know this is again not popular with some of you, Boris, you will take my car only out of my cold, dead hands. I do not accept that in 9 years' time, you are going to make it affordable for the mass of working class people, or practical for the mass of all of the people of this country to be driving around in electric cars. I don't know if you've done a lash up with the makers of electric cars. Who knows, given the level of cronyism that we have been treated to over the last 10 months of this pandemic. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But I promise you, I'm going to fight this every step of the way. And you already know when I'm fighting for something or against something, everyone eventually knows about it. And what about the million MAGA march in the United States? Well, first of all, it wasn't remotely a million, but it was a very big crowd indeed. And what about the violence that's now cascading over the sidewalks and the highways of Washington, D.C.? What does all this mean? This is a country that has lectured us all, as long as I've been alive, about democracy and the desirability of free and fair elections. Except when they don't like the results of those elections, they're prepared to move heaven and earth to bring about a change of the result, or if not, then a change of the regime that won the elections. These are the people that are imposing sanctions, that are choking the life out of civilian populations all over the world in the name of democracy, while they're breaking each other's heads in the center of their own capital. Has the race been called? No, it hasn't. No matter how many misleading headlines you read on social media. There are recounts still to be held. There are court cases still to be discharged. There are grave suspicions that a large number of fraudulent votes due to the mail-in ballot system, against which I have always stood, have cheated the Republicans out of this presidential election. Now, in case it needs saying, I wouldn't vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden if you threatened to execute me unless I picked one. I don't believe in the lesser of two evils. Evil always wins that way. And moreover, the lesser of the two evils has a positive incentive to become still more evil, still closer to the greater evil. And so the fulcrum of evilness continually moves in the wrong direction. Not for me. I wouldn't ask you to vote for Keith Starmer or Boris Johnson, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. But I do believe in truth, no matter who for, no matter who against. We'll be talking to Caleb Maupin in just a few minutes, one of the very finest American commentators on what's happening in DC and what is happening in the election. And then there's Brexit. As I said, this coming week, we have big decisions being made about Brexit. And I'll be talking to John McTernan, a former advisor to Tony Blair, the 3 times Labour Prime Minister, who used to hang out in Downing Street. And I'll be talking to him, therefore, also about the goings-on in Downing Street this week, where the Prime Minister's right-hand man, at the behest of his current girlfriend, packed his things into a box and left. And you'd think the heart had been torn out of the nation. A here today, gone tomorrow advisor that until he took his long drive to Barnard Castle, few people in the country had ever heard of, is now being said to be so indispensable to the Boris Johnson project that project might now be in danger. In fact, they've got their tin helmets on in Downing Street, waiting for the inevitable retaliation from the aforementioned Mr. Cummings, who says that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is already off and running to throw out Boris Johnson, overthrow him, and become Prime Minister in his stead. And we'll be talking about coronavirus too. My own daughter now has it. My eldest daughter, a mother of 4, is in quite a bad way, actually, with it. Not life-threatening or hospitalizing or anything like that, but almost 3,000 people died in Britain of the coronavirus this week alone. And I still hear people saying they've never met anyone that's got it, that it's somehow a fake, that it doesn't exist. Well, you'll need to be hard if you're hard enough to give me a call and speak along those lines this evening, because I know lots of people that have had it. I know people who have died with it, and I'm not prepared to accept either that the coronavirus is not real or accept the current campaign that is now gathering steam to persuade our people not to take the vaccine that is coming onto the market. You'll see in my RT short, which will show shortly, exactly what I think about the vaccines. Not just the coronavirus vaccine, but vaccination as a whole. And that leads me reluctantly on to this. The new Labour plan, which they intend to raise in Parliament this week, to ban all anti-vaccination arguments and memes from social media, is a profoundly disturbing one. Not just because of what it means for freedom of speech, but also the fastest way to undermine public trust in vaccination is to ban people, prosecute people potentially for arguing against them. These are my views. I stand here, I can do no other, but I'm ready to hear your views. You can call me on 02077 982 255 if you're in the United Kingdom. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RT UK News, preferably both of them. Here's my poll. Who's running the UK government? Boris Johnson? Just 21% of you think he's running things. Michael Gove? 19%, no change. Carrie Simons? 60%, no change. It's come to something, isn't it? When 60% of you think that a woman who's never stood for election, never received a vote in her entire life, and is, I don't know which number in line, but the latest girlfriend of Boris Johnson. That's her only qualification, that she gets under the duvet with Boris Johnson at night. 60% of you think that she is running the country. It's going to be a good show, I think. Get your calls in now. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson SatNav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on. Yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, Caleb Maupin is one of my very favourite commentators. I love talking to him. I love hearing him talk, not just when I'm interviewing him, but as a colleague of mine on RT America. I appear every night there, either on the Rick Sanchez show or, well, night at our time, it's lunchtime there, on the Rick Sanchez show, or with Manila Chan on the wonderful In Question show. And I often get to hear Caleb's wisdom, and you should pay attention now too. Welcome, Caleb, to the show. Wonderful to see you as always. The bobbing MAGA hats in downtown DC, that looks quite ugly. How's it going now?
Well, there is a huge base of support for Donald Trump, and we saw that on the streets of D.C. this weekend. A big showing of support, a lot of Trump supporters out there in big numbers, making clear they don't consider this election to be over. They are contesting the results. George, it's like comedy, all right? So this morning we have Donald Trump tweeting out, he won because the left rigged the election. And immediately, all the mainstream media in the United States just jumps on this. Trump says Biden won. He's conceded. He's conceded. And then, of course, we then have Donald Trump coming out and saying, no, I concede nothing. I mean, this is just getting to be comedy, getting to be ridiculous. The mainstream media has decided that the election is over, that Biden is the winner, and that seems to be pretty universally accepted. But regardless, Donald Trump is not accepting it, and mainstream media is just looking for any opportunity to say that he has. The divisions among our elite in the United States are very, very deep.
Does he have a basis for rejecting the result?
Well, he's pointed to a computer glitch in Michigan. He has pointed to instances where there were dead people voting around the country. So he has pointed to some irregularities here, some irregularities there. But the question that I have is that really enough to say that the entire results of the election is that really enough to say that the entire results of the election are illegitimate? I'm not yet convinced, right? And he'll need to convince a judge of that. He'll need to show that somehow the results of the election, would have changed because of these irregularities. I'm not seeing that yet, but he does. At this point, they say they have 11,000 alleged instances. So we'll have to see what they come up with in court.
When you say court, you mean in the first instance, state courts, I presume. not the Supreme Court, where one presumes Donald Trump's arguments might flourish?
Well, I mean, it would have to go to a local court first, and then it would have to be appealed to a federal court, and then the Supreme Court would have to decide to hear the case. That's the process that it would have to go through. And I wouldn't be sure that Donald Trump really has a majority on the Supreme Court. The Republican Party certainly does, but a lot of the justices were appointed by neoconservative Republicans, not by Donald Trump. And while, Brett Kavanaugh, I feel like what he went through during his confirmation hearings might have cemented his loyalty to Donald Trump. What Amy Coney Barrett recently went through as she was put onto the Supreme Court, they might be in Trump's camp, but I'm not sure that you can be sure that John Roberts and that other justices on the Supreme Court are going to have Donald Trump's back. I think that a lot of the establishment, a lot of the neocons, a lot of people even within Donald Trump's own party are telling him to simply accept the results. And I'm not sure the Supreme Court would necessarily step in and give the election to Trump. I'm not sure we're going to see a repeat of the 2000 election here, because it seems like such a broad consensus in American mainstream media that despite whatever irregularities went on, they're saying that this is Joe Biden's victory, that he is the winner. But what's interesting, I will note, is that the president of Mexico is not congratulating Joe Biden. AMLO, López Obrador, the president of Mexico, he says that he's been the victim of voter fraud, and he knows what voter fraud is like, and he says Trump is somebody he's been able to negotiate with. So we have the left-wing president of Mexico not congratulating Donald Trump, or not congratulating Joe Biden, not admitting and accepting the results of this election. So that's quite a development, I think.
Who's doing the fighting in D.C.? I saw some horrific pictures.
Indeed. Well, that has just become a staple of American political life over the past, couple years. We have, these right-wing organizations like the Proud Boys that go out there. We have these left-wing groups that call themselves Antifa, and they go out and they fight in the streets. And we've seen it in Oregon and in Seattle with Patriot Prayer. We've seen it, we saw it in Charlottesville with the horrendous incident a few years ago, and that this kind of situation where we have street fighting between left-wing groups and right-wing groups, that's starting to become just an everyday aspect of American life. It's reminding people almost of the Weimar Republic or something. I mean, that's not how the United States used to be. Sure, we've always had protests and demonstrations, but never has it become routine to have the far left and the far right in the streets fighting each other. And what's more disturbing is that this is the United States of America. So in a lot of cases, there are firearms present at these confrontations between left-wing groups and right-wing groups. Both sides are packing iron, so to speak. So it's a little bit more dangerous than it might be in a European country. So this is certainly a disturbing situation where we're starting to see scuffles just routinely happen on American streets.
Now, let's assume that the fat ladies in the Supreme Court don't sing and that it's over. The Joe Biden cabinet is shaping up every bit as gruesome as many people predicted that it would.
Indeed. I mean, Secretary of Defense, they're talking about Michelle Flournoy, big supporter of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, big advocate of U.S. intervention in Libya. A lot of people are looking at the Biden administration and saying, we used to talk about Wall Street running America, but it seems like if you look at who the Biden administration is working with these execs from Facebook, these execs from Google, this is going to be Silicon Valley's America. The tech giants seem to be taking over, and they suppressed the stories about Hunter Biden and his nefarious activities during the election. Twitter banned it, Facebook banned it. They suppressed negative news about Biden, and that this looks like the White House is going to very much belong to the tech corporations based in California. They seem to be the new rulers of American capitalism.
What could possibly go wrong? The payback for them is places sprinkled liberally throughout the cabinet, and in return for which they suppress all other alternative views. What could possibly go wrong? On that subject, we hear talk that Trump is going to set up a television station. That would seem logical to me. Do you think he will?
Oh, of course. Donald Trump is definitely going to move in that direction. Look, I don't think we're ever going to hear the words "I lost" or "I concede" come out of Donald Trump's mouth. I suspect that in all likelihood he will be leaving office in January, but I really doubt he will ever admit defeat. He will say this was rigged, and he will continue to build up a base of supporters. But this is very important for the American conservatives right now, because at this point, Republicans, conservatives in the United States really don't have an identity, right? Bush-era neoconservatism is dead. And at this point, Donald Trump is really, really essential, because at this point, other than his cult of personality and some of his cliches about anti-communism and his anti-immigrant demagogy, that's really all he has. That's really all the Republican Party has as an identity. Donald Trump is essential because American conservatives are pretty lost. Now, there's a similar identity crisis on the American left. We see that just after the election, they're already the Democratic leadership is already trying to, target and demonize the Democratic Socialist wing, attack Bernie Sanders, attack Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But there is a huge identity crisis on the American right. And Donald Trump is a personality that can hold the American right together. So he's essential. And after leaving office, I expect he will continue to be an entity holding the right wing together. I expect he will probably run again in 2024.
Well, I was going to ask you that. But before I do, I've got to say that the circumstances you just described point to me to a gap in the political market in America. Is anybody thinking about that?
There is, at this point, a lot of confusion. People look at the two major parties and see that they both look like they're on the verge of a split. You have Democratic Socialists and the People's Party that seem to be out of step with the Democratic National Committee. And you have the Trump movement that seems very, very out of step with the Republican leadership. And it seems like the bases of the parties are moving in a populist, anti-establishment direction. But the party machines still continue to be run by people that are representing the entrenched, powerful interests that Americans all throughout the country are angry at. Americans are angry about the fact that it seems like the economy is working in the interest of somebody else. They're angry about the fact that the country is getting poorer and poorer. We've got mass unemployment during a pandemic, and it seems like multinational corporations are making out like bandits while the country gets poorer. The question is, what do you do about it? The right wing and the left wing have very different solutions, but it seems like the country is overwhelmingly upset with the situation, while it seems like the interests of big monopolies and global corporations are being put before the public and the public good.
For, what happens in America is of interest, of course, to other people around the world, including myself, great interest. But in the end, it's your internal business. What we are entitled to be worried about is, what does all this mean for America's role in the world? Is there a greater danger of war? After all, Trump didn't start any wars. Not often you can say that about a US president. Is there more danger now that the Obama, Biden, Clinton gang are back in the driving seat of confrontation with Russia, confrontation over Syria, for example? That's what worries a lot of people, Caleb.
Indeed, and it looks like that may be the case. Look, I mean, at this point, we've got American media, as they are leading up to a Joe Biden administration and a changing of hands, they're playing up the fear that perhaps Donald Trump might pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan before he leaves office, even though the U.S. public wants the troops out of Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan want the troops out of Afghanistan. We've got American media kind of warning us that Donald Trump may use his final months in office to, pull the troops out of Afghanistan. Like, this is a bad thing. They're fearing that Donald Trump may not fulfill his duty as an interventionist and actually fulfill one of his campaign promises, as he tried and promised to do throughout his presidency, to remove the troops from Afghanistan. And we've got, all the media, playing up the idea of how bad that would be, trying to warn us that would be a bad thing. It seems like they're very afraid of Donald Trump pulling the troops out of Afghanistan. And that is something that the establishment of the United States and the forces dominating mainstream media just don't want.
Now, what about finally the coronavirus and its twin, the collapse in the economy? That seems to me to be, I saw a poll that said most Trump supporters think the coronavirus is more or less under control. Nothing could be further from the truth, could it? And what's happening on the virus and what's happening in the US economy consequent to it?
Well, at this point, we have massive unemployment. I'm here in New York. Broadway is shut down. I mean, this city has just completely changed. This is not the same city it was before COVID-19. The amount of homelessness, the amount of people that are hungry is just massive. And it's the same all throughout the country. I mean, this has been a devastating pandemic, devastating in the economic sense as well as in the terms of public health. And at this point, people are bracing for what happens next. And I think the fact that Donald Trump seems to have handled it so poorly, and the fact that he couldn't tell his supporters to wear a mask, for goodness sakes, I think that hurt him in the polls. But at the same time, Trump still does maintain a very big base of supporters. And there's a big division about how we respond to COVID-19. Do we need further lockdowns? Do we need to open up and let it take its course? I mean, there is big division in the country because of the economic situation, that this has been so devastating for the U.S. economy. Look, a big base of Donald Trump's support has been fracking corporations, and the slowdown in oil demand has just devastated the frackers. I mean, they have been just devastated. And people are noticing that a lot of the big corporations have seen COVID-19 as a moment to just secure their monopoly, while a lot of smaller businesses have just been crushed. So there's a division about how to respond to the pandemic. The lower levels of capital, the smaller businesses want to open up as quickly as possible. The big corporations are saying, let's keep locked down so we can maintain our monopoly. And there's a big division, and they don't have unity about how to deal with the pandemic. And that seems to be the problem, is that throughout this entire pandemic crisis, there hasn't been a unified vision and a unified strategy about how to deal with it.
Caleb, marvellous to listen to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated. So next, reaction to that interview with Caleb. Let's take some calls now on the US election. First up, Michael in Minneapolis. Michael, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, George. How are you doing today?
Good, yeah, very good, thanks.
So I will, I'm gonna, you say if you're hard enough, come on. So I'm gonna disagree with you right off the bat here for a change.
Go ahead.
And I'm gonna say that I think that the election is pretty clearly over. Even if a lot of Donald Trump's legal teams, even if their claims are true, there just aren't nearly enough votes for them to flip the election. So I do think Joe Biden won the election. That said, I want to point to the media reaction and the Democratic Party establishment reaction now in compared to 4 years ago. So now they're saying, oh, we have these sacrosanct elections. It is like, it is the height of integrity.
Exactly.
No one could
You
ever
can't
interfere with
rig an
that.
American election, except the last one.
Well, it can't be done. And so everyone is giving, people, especially people, who are, consider them liberal or progressive, are giving Trump supporters a really hard time right now and saying they're delusional and they're crazy and blah, blah, blah. But I'm saying, can you blame them? Donald Trump, the corporate media never admitted that Donald Trump was a legitimate president. They spent 3 years prosecuting the crazy Russia conspiracy with no evidence to show for it. And on top of that, one thing that the conservative media has done a good job of doing is letting their voters also know, they know that just like I know, and it is painful for me, that the Democrats blatantly rigged the primary. It was pretty blatant in 2016, but it was just over the top blatant the way they rigged it this time. So if you're a Trump supporter and you're sitting there saying, wait a second, in 2016, they said that it was easy for Vladimir Putin to rig an American election without any evidence, and then they rigged their own primary twice. But now you're going to tell me that it's impossible to rig an American election? So I don't agree with them. I don't think this election was stolen. But, George, can you even blame them for feeling the way
not
they
at
do?
all. Not at all. And anyone who's fought, as I have, the British Labour Party in inner cities knows exactly the use to which postal balloting is put. Tammany Hall is Tammany Hall for a reason. the Democratic Party are Tammany Hall. And what makes you think Tammany Hall hasn't moved into the digital age?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, George, like I said, I've done a lot of reading. I haven't found anything that's persuasive to me yet that that the election was rigged in any way. And I also think that the fact that the Republicans actually picked up seats in the House and maintained the Senate.
But that makes it more suspicious, Michael. That makes it more suspicious. There are millions of people who voted only for Joe Biden and not for any of the rest of the Democratic ticket. Well, that's suspicious, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Trump ran a uniquely bad campaign. So I guess it might be suspicious. I don't think it's necessarily... I don't know, George. I guess I haven't been persuaded of that myself, but I'm, obviously until
Michael,
all the results.
It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Don't be shy. Come back. Gerard is in Kilwinning. Let's hear from him. Kilwinning in Scotland. Go ahead, Gerard.
It is indeed, George. How you doing, man? Great show as always.
Thanks, mate.
Can I just say, I think you at the start of the show, the great segment, and the last caller kind of stole my thunder. Just a more general point about Trump. All I've heard from the liberal media and all the anti-Trumpers over the past 4 years is about things that Trump can't do. He can't win the Republican nomination. He'll never become president. He can't try and make peace with North Korea and Russia. He's done all these things. And now they're saying he can't win the election or overturn the result. Have these people not been paying attention? Because he's done everything in the last 4 years that they said he can't do. And I'm not for one saying that the election has been stolen, although, as the last caller said, 4 years ago, they totally gave a Brutus and Cassius stab in the back to Bernie Sanders and stole it for Hillary.
Exactly. Stole it for Hillary, stole it for Biden, said the Russians stole the 2016. How come elections are suddenly pristine in the United States?
American elections, George, as you know very well, they've never been democratic, whether it's the suppression of the black vote, big business lobbying, the fake news on both sides, like right and left. So, but just on Trump, I mean, how did he know? How did he know he won't be able to turn this result? How did he know this? I'm not going to pretend to know how the Electoral College works, but this result is not official, as you said.
No, it's not. It's not official, and there is, of course, the option that Republican-controlled state legislatures will decide that the official ballot result announced by their returning officers are not sound. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Joe Biden will be the president in January. But you're right. Anyone that rules out Trump pulling the iron from the fire is making a mistake. Gerard, last word to you.
Just like say, I suppose symbolically, George, I should be happy with another Irish Catholic being in the White House. But as you said yourself, Biden is such a deep state, neoliberal, industrial military complex.
A creature of the swamp, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not
General
good either
Franco
way
was a Catholic. Didn't mean I had to support him.
Well, so was good old Adolf, wasn't he? I think he was a bit of a lapsed one, mind you. But it's not good for the world, George, with Biden or Trump going ahead. That's all.
No, exactly. That's why you need a new party in America, a People's Party in America. Gerard, thanks very much indeed for that. Let me remind you of the numbers: 02077 982 255 if you're in the United Kingdom. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480, or tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK News. How's my poll doing? 837 votes in, and it's still Carrie Simons that's running the country. Comments in response to the poll. Kate says, nobody has been running the country for a long time. The self-servitives have just been serving themselves and their mates large portions of taxpayers' money, in some cases coming back for seconds. That's all they care about. Very good, Kate. Will says government is a poor administration at the moment. It's completely dependent on the Office for National Statistics, ONS, the chief medical officer, other advisors, scientists, and Excel, etc. Could probably all be done by an algorithm. And Andrew says, you've forgotten an option, George. D, who actually knows? Actually, I'm only allowed 3 options. But Sean says a PR firm is running the country. Graham says Larry the Cat. Rob says the captain of the Marie Celeste. And Dermot says, clearly it's Carrie. Boris is now firing people based on her whims. And Anthony says it's the same people running the US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canadian governments. And Hillary says, I wonder if that's the Hillary, is anyone running the country? If they are, they must be invisible. And David says, who's running the UK government? The deep state, probably. And John says, Noddy from Toy Town is my guest. Now, let's hear my short on vaccinations. The war of the vaccines has begun. Little wonder when you think about it, the coronavirus 19 pandemic has swept around the world, infecting millions of people and killing a fair proportion of those. Britain and the United States have suffered more than any other 2 countries in the world. Record numbers of infections and deaths steadily climbing. In the United States, on this, the day of recording, the biggest number yet. It didn't melt away when the spring sunshine came, as Donald Trump had predicted, and no amount of disinfectant or light into the lungs has made any difference at all. Economies all around the world have been as devastated as the public health of their population. And so the race for a vaccine was inevitable. The point is, though, that Russia won the race. The Sputnik 5 vaccine has proved astoundingly efficacious with virtually no side effects at all. It has a 92% success rate. The Chinese vaccines, the Cuban vaccines, are all out of the starter blocks and running fast down the track. But no one in the West was remotely interested in purchasing those, even though they would have been sold at cost price in the interests of the public health of the population of the world. No, we were waiting for Big Pharma in the West. Pfizer, the inventors of Viagra, have come in hard with their offer. It's a 90% success rate and has to be kept at minus 75 degrees Fahrenheit. A tall order if you're going to be sending that around the world. Moreover, to the public health authorities, it's going to be costing $15 a shot. It's not nearly as far along in terms of its development as the Russian and Chinese vaccines are, but hey, what does that matter? The only thing that counts in Britain and America is making sure that the taxpayers' dollars and pounds ends up in the pockets of cronies. And there ain't no crony like Big Pharma in the West. Some say that Western governments are the slaves of the big pharmaceutical giants who've grown enormous on the rich pickings of public health services. But actually, it's probably the other way around. The revolving door between government and big business is such that the people making the orders today will be working for those very corporations tomorrow. Me, I just want a vaccine. At my age, and with 5 young children, I can't afford to get coronavirus. So I'll take the vaccine. I offered to take the Sputnik 5 vaccine live on air on my show on RT. They haven't yet taken me up on that. I believe in vaccines. My latest child, 3 months old, has just come back from the doctor, where she received a raft of vaccines necessary to protect her from the scourge of things like TB and meningitis. I'm not one of the anti-vaxxer crowd, but I do understand why people are deeply suspicious of big Western pharmaceutical corporations, whose purpose, after all, in making medicine is not to make people better, but to make more money for their executives and ultimately for their shareholders. That's the reason why there is such widespread distrust amongst the population of vaccination as a means of coming to grips with the likes of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm not going to encourage that feeling. I want the first vaccine with a decent record of efficacy and with minimal side effects to get here as quickly as possible. If I could fly to Moscow or Beijing, I would, and I'd already have had it. But if the Viagra offer is the best that I can do, I'll take it. But it is a sad state of affairs that what counts in the race for a vaccine for a deadly pandemic is who is going to make the biggest profits from it.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Looks like a record number again for callers. I need to press on with them. Nazar is in Ireland, but wants to talk about the US election. Go ahead, Nazar.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome.
It's always a pleasure to listen to you, George.
Thank you.
George, just the point that I wanted to make was that being from the Middle East myself, when we look at the elections in the U.S., sadly, whether it's Biden or Trump, there's going to be no changes made. And that's the tragedy of it all. I mean, the situation in Iraq is dire, in Syria is dire. But what's being done? And the issue is that there is nothing that the American government now is willing to do to change the situation. They're still supporting these dictatorial regimes in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the region. So when will America stop intervening and just remove their presence in the Middle East and let the Middle East get on? That's really the point I wanted to make.
Well,
Thank you.
I hate to disagree with you, but I must a little. There will be some change for the better in some places and some change for the worse in others. For example, Biden has pledged to end U.S. support for the Saudi Arabian war on the people of the Yemen, one of the poorest people on earth, being mercilessly slaughtered by one of the richest people on earth in Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that many of the Saudi Arabians are themselves ethnically Yemeni. It's quite likely that MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is not celebrating the defeat of Donald Trump. He is much more likely to be anxious that Biden might, I stress, keep that promise, and that therefore the long, bloody war against Yemen will have to come to an end because, of course, Saudi Arabia is a puppet state of the United States and could not prosecute that war if the US had decided to end it. It is also possible that, it's not the Middle East, of course, but adjacent, it is also possible that Biden will return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and that will put noses out of joint amongst American satrapies elsewhere in the Gulf, and also make Israel very angry if the United States re-engages with Iran. In Syria, it's likely to be bad news because, of course, the Libyan war was brought to us by the Obama, Biden, Clinton gang. So was the Syrian war. And it might be that even though the war was almost done in Syria, that the United States shifts emphasis and begins again to exacerbate the conflict in Syria. Last word to you, Nazar.
No, thanks, George. I appreciate that. I mean, we simply dream of the day when the Middle East can just live like a normal life, like everyone else, and just stop the wars and the endless killings that we see. And we just hope that America takes a positive role in the Middle East and stop supporting these, as you call them, the head choppers in Saudi Arabia and other places, and to let the Middle East taste democracy, let them go back to normal lives and stop the exodus of the masses that we see now in Europe of people leaving their homes because of war and killing and destruction. So the day that this stops is what we welcome and we cherish. And I hope whoever it is takes a positive stance towards the Middle East and lets the people in that region live like everyone else. Thank you, George, for allowing me to speak.
God willing, thank you, Nazar in Ireland. Let's go to Ehab in Detroit. Go ahead, Ehab.
Yes, salam alaikum, George.
Walaikum salam. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for having me on. Just a few points I'd like to bring to focus. I think we heard similar points, but I'll go ahead and do that. So with the U.S. elections and all the drama that's going on around it, I believe everything will blow away, and we'll see Biden in the White House to serve the policies and implement the policies of financial corporations and the large military-industrial complex.
How did you vote? Detroit voted overwhelmingly for Biden, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And funny enough, some people have been saying like everything broke when it came to the Arab vote because that's where Biden won. I don't agree with that. I think the Arab population is minor in terms of its effect. We hope to have a louder voice, but that's yet to come.
Well, you're one of those who imagines that the Obama, Biden, Clinton gang will continue business as usual. And that means the danger of more war, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there are upcoming limitations in terms of that. I truly believe that the U.S., in terms of financial and military well-being, is not all there to allow it to have such a free hand. Albeit, I do believe that the covert operations will continue. All the talk, and especially, I would like to mention I think there was a New York Times article concerning like the killing of the number 2 in Al-Qaeda in Iran, trying to link Iran with Al-Qaeda, which we all know is absolute false, is an absolute falsehood. But still, there's something being arranged. Many people believe that there will be some kind of, I don't know, something to reshuffle the cards, whether momentarily or put Biden in a bad state as he comes in. It's there. Also, talking about the same gang that continues to rule the U.S., there's also an upcoming disadvantage to that whole setup. If it blows over, if it blows out, and it's going to be because of the disconnect between the two U.S. major political parties and the demands and wishes of their constituents, whether be it on the divergent path that both the Democratic and Republican parties are taking, or in any other matter. That's how I see it.
Fascinating. Thanks, Ehab, and say hi to all my friends in Michigan, please. On line 1, we've got Dean in Washington State, a new caller again. Dean, welcome.
Oh, thank you, George. Thank you.
Most welcome, sir. What would you like to say?
Well, I was just going to tell you, I don't know, well, I do kind of know how you feel about it as an outsider, but the thing I've been most depressed about, not only with the coronavirus just skyrocketing in our country, is that I remember 4 years ago, as the election was coming up, was no different than this year. When you look at your choices and you say to yourself, really? This is it?
Yeah. Is that the best? Is that the best that the most powerful country in the world can come up with as a choice?
Exactly. Now, I despise Trump. I have engaged with Trump voting people and actually have made headway when they realize where I've said, if you quit talking over me, you realize we agree on 20 things, we disagree on about 4. But the thing is, Biden is his corruption makes Pelosi look like a child, and that's saying something.
Yeah, and if there's anyone allows it to be broadcast or published, I think we're going to hear some big news about that quite soon. Dean, thanks for the call. Don't be shy. Come back every week. On line 2, Anthony is in Detroit. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, how you doing, George? Good to hear you. And
you.
Ahab, the other caller, he was spot on.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, but yeah, I just want to say I think that the question of how could Trump lose, supposedly, and the House of Representatives, pick up a couple of Republican seats, is just that, considering that our congressional districts are so gerrymandered from like every 10-year census, last one 2010, and half of them look like a spaghetti noodle thrown on the floor. It's crazy. So there's something
now
like that to consider.
You're right. That is one possible explanation, but it isn't an explanation for why millions of ballots had only one X on them, and that was for Biden.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you went,
I hadn't thought of that one either.
If you went to the trouble of getting a postal ballot, why would you only vote on the president? Why would you not vote for the Senate, for the House of Representatives, for the governor, for the state legislatures? Why would you only vote one vote?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. And I mean, I haven't actually seen it myself, but if it was presented to me, I'd totally be willing to, look at it and all that. But I know the tendency of people that I know personally is to more so go vote for the representatives and leave the president's spot blank. So yeah, very questionable. You're right.
They are suspicious. Anyway, Anthony, don't be a stranger. Come back regularly. Let me give out the numbers one more time. 02077 982 255. That's the UK number. The US number 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK News. You can still vote on my first poll. Almost 1,000 people have done, and Carrie Simons remains firmly in the lead. Have I got time for a bit of social media? I hope so. Dan says, first time in Trump's life, he hasn't got what he wanted. He's having a tantrum. And Matthew says, I'm amazed that anyone is even discussing the votes seriously. I doubt Trump is even taking it seriously at this stage. And Mick says, make America sane again. When was it sane, Mick? Kerry says, despite everything, Kamala Harris has more charisma than the whole Republican Party. And Ali says, I'm still waiting for Hunter's laptop. Well, we might have to wait for Donald Trump TV in order to get into that. And Mark says, Trump will campaign for the next 4 years and run again. Well, I'm sure that is his instinct at this point in time, but there's a long time. If a week is a long time in politics, 4 years is an aeon. And Donald Trump is not a well man. He's not a fit man. If he was out bare-chested riding horses like Vladimir Putin, I might find that more credible. But what state Donald Trump will be in for another run in 4 years' time, I've got my doubts. More likely to me is that one of his children will run as his surrogate. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's my instinctive view. Nikki says, it's like we're living in Animal Farm, trying to overturn power, only to reinstate it again with a new world order. Pauline says, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that when America met its downfall, it would not come from outside, but from within. Looks like he may have been right. And Tom says, the mainstream media will wish they didn't support the Biden-Harris ticket because he will take the USA into many wars around the world. Mainstream media love wars. Tony says, I read an article on Twitter by a Californian statistician referencing a tranche of 28,000 votes for Biden that had not a single offsetting vote for Trump. He calculated the odds on that happening at 1/100,000%. given that Michigan managed to have a tranche of votes for Biden that numbered 138,433 with none for Trump appear overnight, I think it's beyond doubt that the election was rigged. And Sarah says, George, you're wrong about mail-in ballots. 6 states use them all the time. My state, Nebraska, is totally controlled by the Republicans, and the Secretary of State offered the mail-in option to all voters. I mail-voted primary and general elections. And Kevin says Trump won't see another election. He's let down the money men, and they only allow one mistake. Let's get the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Donald Trump has said for the first time that President-elect Joe Biden has won the US election, but he went on to allege it was only because the election was rigged. Trump went on to make his now familiar litany of allegations over the handling of the election. It was, however, a significant acknowledgement from the president, who, despite losing the Electoral College by 74 and popular vote by 5 million, has refused to accept the result. In a later tweet, he said, "I concede nothing. We have a long way to go." Ireland is warning that a no post-Brexit trade deal with the European Union will be struck if the UK pushes on with a plan to break international law. Tensions have ratcheted up following comments by senior figures in both governments ahead of another crucial week for negotiations. Ireland's Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said that should British Prime Minister Boris Johnson persist with trying to override parts of the EU divorce deal, then a new treaty on the future relationship will be off the table. But a senior minister in the UK confirmed that Johnson will stick to his plan and keep the controversial parts of the draft legislation in place. The talks between the UK and EU are due to resume in Brussels tomorrow. The impact of a new COVID vaccine will kick in significantly over the summer, and life should be back to normal by next winter, one of its creators has said. Professor Ugur Sahin, co-founder of biotech, also raised hopes that the jab could halve transmission of the virus, resulting in a dramatic reduction in cases. Last week, BioNTech and its co-developers Pfizer said preliminary analysis showed their vaccine could prevent more than 90% of people from getting COVID-19. About 43,000 people have taken part in tests. In a BBC interview, Sahin said he expected further analysis to show that the vaccine would reduce transmission between people as well as stopping symptoms developing in someone who has had the vaccine. The new drug, which was trialled in 6 countries, is given in 2 doses 3 weeks apart. A referendum on Scottish independence should not be held while the country heals from coronavirus, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has said. Brown said that the country was facing huge problems and should not hold a referendum. He said, "We are in the middle of a virus, we're in the middle of a recession." The SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, has said his party must plan for a referendum in 2021. Blackford tweeted that a vote for the SNP in the Scottish Parliament elections next year would be a vote for a second referendum on Scottish independence. He apologised for having to put off holding a referendum in 2020 as the Scottish Government had to focus on its response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but he insisted that a referendum would happen and must take place in 2021. However, Gordon Brown said that the country needed time to heal before any divisive, conflicting referendum that will cause consternation in Scotland for months and months to come. Space agency NASA and its private launch services provider SpaceX are preparing to send 4 astronauts to the International Space Station. The crew will ride to orbit in a Dragon capsule atop a Falcon 9 rocket. It will be only the second time that this launch system has been used to transport people. It follows a successful demo flight conducted back in May, which marked the resumption of astronaut missions from US soil after a gap of 9 years. The launch is due in Florida at 7:27 local time tomorrow. It's what's known as an instantaneous launch window, meaning the mission must leave on the button if it wants to catch the station as it circles the Earth overhead. Tigray's leader has admitted that it fired missiles at the capital of neighbouring Eritrea in another escalation of the fighting in Ethiopia. Earlier, at least 3 rockets appeared to have been aimed at the airport in the Eritrean capital, Asmara, hours after the Tigray regional government warned it might attack. The attacks on an international target represent another dangerous escalation of the conflict in one of Africa's most populous nations after fighting broke out on November the 4th. On Saturday, 2 other rockets were reported to have hit Ethiopia's Amhara state after earlier allegations of attacks on reportedly ethnic Amhara people in Tigray. And finally, drumming phenomenon Nandi Bushell can't embark on a world tour right now. The pandemic aside, she's 10 and still in primary school. And besides, it's not very rock and roll to tour with your parents as chaperones and a backpack full of homework. She has, however, embarked on an internet friendship with Dave Grohl, the frontman of the band Foo Fighters. The two, separated by decades of experience, have repeatedly squared off online in an ongoing drum battle. And now Grohl has written a song about her and her precocious talent. Nandi from Ipswich performed several covers of Foo Fighters hits on her YouTube channel and challenged Grohl to a drumming duel in August. Grohl accepted the challenge and used his daughter's drum set so they'd perform on kits of the same size, jamming to the Foo Fighters classic Everlong, and in response, he challenged her to play Dead End Friends by Them Crooked Vultures. Nandi was more than up to the task, so Grohl, who has 3 daughters of his own, conceded the victory to her. I've got something special for you, he told her in his latest video, released just days ago. Something you've never heard before, something I've never heard before, because I'm about to write this off the top of my head for you, he said. Grohl accompanied himself on electric guitar, bass and drums, unleashed his original song Nandi with his daughters on background vocals. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Twitter poll, who's running the UK government? Boris Johnson, 21%. Michael Gove, 19%. Carrie Simons, 60%. She is down 1 though. Boris is up 2 to 21. 942 people have voted. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Indeed, up till the best part of 9 o'clock, you can vote at George Galloway. Now, John McTernan is a political strategist and commentator and a good friend of mine for many years. He was also a political advisor to Tony Blair in number 10 Downing Street. So we've hit it off getting John on this week because the biggest story in Britain this week has not been the 3,000 people that died of the coronavirus, but a man, a shabby man, shambling out of number 10, carrying a box. John McTernan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know we intend to talk about Brexit, but I can't let you go with your knowledge, inside knowledge of the corridors of power, to ask you what your observations are about what took place this week.
In the end, that cliche, advisors advise, politicians decide, that's the actual truth. And that the question around Boris Johnson is, does he have a political agenda of his own? Because if you look at Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair or even John Major or David Cameron, they had their own agendas and their staff were there to magnify the influence and the impact that those prime ministers with their agendas had. And what you've seen acting out in the quasi-court politics of number 10 this week, it's been like the Sun King, whose stool is closest to the Sun King during the week. But the core of it, the centre of it is, what does Boris Johnson want to do as Prime Minister? Sure, he said, get Brexit done. That's been done. We're leaving the European Union. The only question is on what terms it's going to be done. No deal, a thin deal, a sensible deal that's good for the country, good for workers across the country. That's probably almost certainly not going to happen. And so what you've seen working out is the fact that if there's a Prime Minister with no agenda, then advisors will seek to fill that gap. But advisors are still advisors. They're not elected officials. They've not been elected. Like whatever you think of the cabinet, each one of them is who's been elected in the House of Commons is an MP who's actually had to put themselves up for election. So it's been, for those of us who like court intrigue, who love poring over briefings, it's been extraordinary content during the week. But for those of us who, as you say, care about the fact that thousands of our fellow citizens have died this week, and thousands more are going to die next week, and thousands more will die before the lockdown is potentially ended on December the 2nd. It looks like a hugely wrong focus of energy.
And yet, you mentioned various, only two of them I agree with were strong prime ministers, Thatcher and Blair. I don't think that Major or Cameron were strong prime ministers. But of the two that you mentioned that I agree with, they were strong, and therefore their advisor was weak by comparison to them. The question is Boris Johnson remotely strong? Because he doesn't look strong to me, and he looks to me to have been rather overly dependent on Dominic Cummings.
There's no doubt that the way the Prime Minister has been happiest in the last 18 months has been when campaigning. So whether it's campaigning to get Theresa May out of the Prime Ministership, out of number 10, campaigning for a general election, campaigning against the Supreme Court, campaigning against the House of Commons, campaigning against his own party, to suspend Ken Clarke and others from the Parliamentary Party. The energy and the pleasure of campaigning, that's been really clear. And what's been very odd is that it feels to me as though Boris Johnson is a man who wants to have been Prime Minister. So, he wants it on his CV. He wants to be Prime Minister, and he wants to have been Prime Minister. He actually finding the job of being Prime Minister very difficult. And that's why he's come to rely on Dominic Cummings, Lee Kane, his other senior advisors left this week, because he doesn't, he's sitting there with the door closed. He's like the Robert Redford character in that film, that famous film, The Candidate, who sits down with his campaign manager when he's won the nomination and won the election and goes, what do we do now? That feeling, what do we do now?
Now, let's look at the new Boris Johnson slouching towards Parliament, seeking to be born. The new Green Boris Johnson, who's going to scrap our cars in 9 years. The new Boris Johnson, who's going to be nice to the SNP. You and I both have form on that latter point. And that makes some of us a little bit nervous. The Boris Johnson that might be about to be very nice indeed to the European Union. What do you make of the credibility of a new Boris Johnson?
One thing, he goes through more character changes than a character in a soap opera, doesn't he? There's almost a sense of continual self-reinvention. The past never happened. That's not important. He lives in a continuous present. So what he says about himself becomes the thing about himself. So will he try and turn into the new year with a kind of new agenda? Yes, he will. He'll say he's green. We've had the FDR phase. He's going to build the country bigger and better. We're now moving into the green phase. One of the things that's going for him in that, to be honest, is Joe Biden's got a climate change agenda. The European Union have a climate change agenda. And President Xi in China's got a climate change agenda. So he's in agreement with the three biggest blocs who will determine whether or not the world will do something about this. And he's hosting the big UN meeting, COP26, in Glasgow at the end of next year, November 2021. So he's got a wind behind him. He is actually probably on the greenish end of the Conservative Party, and you mustn't forget that Margaret Thatcher was hugely important in the original Rio, the very first of the COP meetings. She was hugely important in the action taken to remediate the damage to the ozone layer. So Margaret Thatcher always took the view that conservation and conservative come from the same world. So so there's been a strand in the Tory party on the right as well as on the kind of softer lefty liberal. Will he achieve it? The thing you wonder about Boris Johnson is, what is his attention span? Can he stick to something for as long as a year? Between now and COP26, there's a year. Now, I think you can make a social democratic case for the maintenance of the union. You can say that redistribution is the heart of the union. You can say we can use the year till COP26 and beyond to demonstrate that greening our economy, getting to net zero, needs to be done in a way that creates new jobs, green jobs, manual workers' jobs, skilled workers' jobs, green-collar jobs, white-collar jobs, that this could be done in a proper Rooseveltian sense, in a proper progressive sense. But you once you start to talk about it and think about it, and you can see it as a way of arguing with the SNP to say a country of 5 million should be producing a lot of renewable energy, but you need to sell it to other people. So it needs a subsidy. And the subsidy from the UK for 50 million people in England is massive to the renewable industry in Scotland. So you can start to make a progressive argument, an argument of integration, a kind of greening of the union. But once you start to talk about a complicated, sophisticated case for keeping the union together into the future, you kind of doubt that Boris Johnson's going to have the attention span to stick to it. Because the boring thing about government is that every day you have to get up and do lots of meetings and read lots of papers and make lots of quite finely nuanced decisions. You can't just make Britain green again. You can't just say that and then move off and do something else. And that was one of the things that lies at the back of it. Remember at the beginning of COVID, the Prime Minister, there was a series of COBRA meetings the PM didn't even turn up at. And that has never happened before in UK history. So it kind of gives you a sense of the seriousness with which he takes the position, not the position, seriousness with which he takes the responsibility of the role, the concrete responsibilities. Can you imagine him chairing subcommittees, cabinet subcommittees, driving through these complex agendas that we're going to need? I'm not sure. He'd far rather, as you said, tell us what kind of car is going to be banned in 9 years' time and then wander off and let somebody else deal with the details.
He has appeared light-minded, distracted by his personal affairs. I mean, the reason he missed those COBRA meetings was because of the rather tumultuous beginning of his relationship with the woman who is now living in Downing Street. The sacking of Dominic Cummings and the press secretary alongside him appears to have been driven by their animus towards Carrie Simons. From your experience in Downing Street, is that normal behaviour?
I think, to be fair to Carrie, we're coming into a generation of politicians who have partners who have serious careers of their own, and that they have quite often careers which come into the political sphere. I think Cherie found it difficult with Tony because she had very strong views on human rights, she had very strong views on human rights legislation. When you have that crossover, it becomes more complicated. When you have a political spouse, they expect to be political, but in Britain, you don't really have, the role of the first lady or the first fiancée in this case. So I think the difficulty, I think, is a genuine one. But it goes back, in a sense, doesn't it, to is he a details guy or not a details guy? He doesn't appear to be a details guy. And there's all people talk about when Boris was the London mayor, he always had somebody who fixed things for him, who got the details together, said to him when he had to make a decision. But the role of Mayor of London is, to a great extent, a theatrical role. It's a role in which you have to defend London globally, defend London against Trump, defend London against the UK government, but it doesn't have the same set of constant decision-making you have to do. If you're the Prime Minister, you're always balancing issues, calling the shots, particularly if you're taking the country in this new situation where it's outside the European Union, when there's a whole agenda of really interesting things you could be doing. But again, they're arguing about state aid at the moment with the negotiation with the European Union. course, a UK government could do really interesting things regionally with state aid, really interesting things with the fourth industrial revolution with state aid. Do you trust this mob to look at the details sufficiently to even get it right for the boss class, let alone for workers? I'm not sure you do.
No, I don't. Now, on that, you're a realistic man, above all a realistic man. You accepted right at the beginning of what you said, counter to your own views, I have no doubt, that we are leaving the European Union. There's no point in crying over that spilt milk. What do you expect to happen? And will it happen this week?
I expect a deal will be done. I think the election of President Biden has almost certainly tipped the balance diplomatically. We know about diplomats. What do diplomats want? They always want to do a deal. We know about the European Union. When does it do a deal? At the very last minute. What do we know about the Johnson White House? They dither and they haver. So it's like we're getting a bit more of the same at the moment, I suspect. Will we get the right deal? No, because making a deal which you push all these decisions to the end point like this, we need the deal more than Europe does, because it's a bigger hit on our economy than it is to their economy. We need the deal more than they do, because messing up the Good Friday Agreement is not an option for the UK government, for the simple reason you really shouldn't mess about peace treaties, but for the other reason, the force majeure reason, which is that with the second Irish Catholic president of the United States, who's going to take that really seriously. So everybody around Boris will be advising him that you don't bet the wrong way on this one, on such a big issue, when you've got the forthcoming, the next 4 years. This Tory government don't have to go to election until the next time that Biden has to go to an election. So I think there will be a deal. The terrible thing about it is it will not be one which benefits the health service. It'll be one which discriminates against workers coming into the health service and to the care sector. It won't be one which addresses any of the issues, the genuine issues of concern that workers have across the country. Like for me, the most underrepresented group of people in the country at the moment are what you might call the Lexiteers, the people who voted for Brexit because they believed they wanted a more left-wing country. I think they're utterly underserved in Scotland, for example, where you've got a government, in the Scottish government, the SNP government, who pose as the friends of the workers, but want to take people straight back into the European Union. There's a lot of working-class people who don't want to be in the European Union, who don't have their voice heard at all in Scottish politics. There's a lot of them in the UK, and at least, Keir Starmer this morning said we're leaving the European Union. That matter, that issue is settled. The future issue is the nature of our relationship. But I think we'll get, I suppose, a classic Boris Johnson thing, which is a late deal, a theatrical deal, in which the details, when you look at them, won't be that good for us.
I agree with you entirely about Joe Biden tipping the balance. What does the non-US influenced issues, for example, fishing, is he going to sell out our fishing communities, many of which are in Scotland?
The answer is probably yes, because all fisheries deals in the end sell out all fishermen. That's the nature of them. As far as I know, from senior civil servants in the UK government, fishing is a simple deal to do. All you have to do is make Britain lose and make Europe lose and make the losses happen in the future. That's it. So you agree to a process whereby everybody loses, but loses gradually and slowly over time. Because we have to understand too that while British fishermen, English, Scottish fishermen hold fishing licenses, they don't actually do the fishing. Go to Peterhead and ask who's out on the boats doing the fishing. They're not. It's not even as EU nationals. These are international nationals who are doing that, and that there's a whole underbelly to the fishing industry of casualised labour, of international labour brought here, which doesn't bear close examination, in my view, if you're a Social Democrat.
Interesting. I haven't heard that argument before, but then you're always interesting. John McTernan, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated. Who's running the UK government? Boris Johnson, 20%, down 1. Michael Gove, 20%, up 1. If you want my view, that's how I would have voted. I think Michael Gove is running the UK government. And Carrie Simons, she's still on 60%. Over 1,000 have voted. You've still got about 20, 25 minutes to get your vote in on that. Let me take a very quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, this is where I take a look back at the 7 days in our history, the major events which influenced and shape the future to come, some of which can be felt to this day. This is the week. On this day in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered tobacco in what was called the New World. Millions to come were to be hooked. In 1904, King C. Gillette patented the safety razor. Who knew that? A man called King C. Gillette patented the safety razor. We're still using them today, or at least I was this afternoon. The German Luftwaffe bombed Coventry on this day in 1940 in a massive raid which lasted more than 10 hours and left much of the city devastated. I was just reading how Coventry then twinned with Stalingrad, a twinning which unfortunately fell away in later Cold War years. Relays of enemy aircraft dropped bombs indiscriminately on Coventry. One of the many buildings hit included the 14th century cathedral, which was all but destroyed. More than 500 people died and more than 5,000 homes were blitzed. Britain and the Republic of Ireland in 1985 signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement, a deal giving Dublin a role in Northern Ireland for the first time in more than 60 years. Britain's Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, said it brought new hope of ending the violence in Northern Ireland, hope which did not last long. 6 years earlier, on the 16th of November in 1979, Thatcher named Sir Anthony Blunt, a former Security Service officer and personal advisor on art to the Queen, as the fourth man in the Cambridge spy ring. These were the men who passed on British state security secrets to the Soviet Union during World War II and into the early 1950s. The announcement, given in a written answer in the Commons, ended a 15-year cover-up. Thatcher revealed that Blunt had confessed to the authorities in 1964, but under a secret deal was granted immunity from prosecution. Blunt made his own statement to the media in which he said he had come to bitterly regret his spying activities, but at the time he had done so out of idealism. And in my book, Queensway, and in the sequel, which is imminent, called Black Lake, there's far more on the activities of those famous four, or famous five, actually. And this was also the day in 2003 that Lionel Messi made his official debut for FC Barcelona in a friendly match against Porto. 17 years later, he's still there. Riot police in Czechoslovakia in this week, in 1989, arrested hundreds of people taking part in a protest march. More than 15,000 people, mostly students, took part in the demonstration, the biggest show of public dissent for 2 decades. They called for the resignation of their country's government. Scores of people were injured, several seriously, as the police forcibly broke up the rally. November 17th was the day when, in 1855, David Livingstone became the first European to see Victoria Falls, quite a sight, I can tell you, in what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. And in the 1869, the Suez Canal in Egypt opened, linking the Mediterranean and the Red Seas on this day. In 1997, more than 68 people were killed after an attack on a group of foreign tourists visiting a temple in southern Egypt. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The tourist bus was fired on as they visited the temple of Hatshepsut, one of the main attractions in the town of Luxor in southern Egypt. It also devastated the tourism industry and the Egyptian economy, which has never properly recovered. It was believed to have been carried out by members of the Egyptian Islamist extremist group Al-Gama al-Islamiyah and financed by Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network. In one of the most gruesome and senseless acts of the 20th century, more than 900 people, 914 to be exact, committed mass suicide in 1978 in what came to be known as the Jonestown Massacre. The dead included 276 children. Most of the dead members of the People's Temple Christian Church had consumed a soft drink laced with cyanide and sedatives. The body of the People's Temple leader, Jim Jones, was found with a bullet wound in the right temple, believed to have been self-inflicted. Wow. The bodies of the 412 which were never claimed by relatives are buried in a mass grave in Oakland, California. So 914 committed suicide, 412 of them, their bodies were never claimed by relatives, and they're buried in a mass grave in Oakland. 31 people died in 1987 after a fire at King's Cross Station in central London. It started under an escalator, quickly catching hold as commuters used the underground station. And in 1991, the church envoy, Terry Waite, was freed by Islamist extremists who kidnapped him in Beirut in 1987. Waite, the envoy of the Archbishop of Canterbury, successfully negotiated the release of several Westerners held in Beirut before he was also taken captive. He was released with an American academic, Thomas Sutherland, who had been seized in 1985. In this week, the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, began a trip to Israel in 1977, the first Arab leader ever to visit Israel. President Sadat's plane landed at Ben Gurion Airport at the start of his 36-hour visit. He was greeted by Israel's Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, and Israeli President Ephraim Katzir, and a 21-gun salute was fired in his honor. In October 1981, Sadat was assassinated by his own soldiers, shot at a military parade in Cairo. In 1945, the Nuremberg trials began of 20 of Germany's Nazi leaders charged with war crimes. And General Francisco Franco, who ruled Spain with a brutal authoritarian hand for 39 years, died in 1975 at the age of 82. He had been ill for 5 weeks and died at a hospital in Madrid. Doctors said the cause of death was heart failure, aggravated by peritonitis. In 1978, the Liberal Party leader, Jeremy Thorpe, was accused in court of plotting to kill his former lover and dispose of the body. The victim-to-be was former male model Norman Scott. Thorpe was eventually found not guilty, but his reputation was ruined. And it was the week in 1995 when Diana, Princess of Wales, spoke openly for the first time about her separation from the Prince of Wales and her adultery in a frank interview for the BBC's Panorama programme. During her hour-long conversation with BBC reporter Martin Bashir, now the BBC's religious affairs correspondent, she admitted to the affair with her riding instructor, James Shuett. Her marriage to Charles ended with the issue of a decree nisi in August 1996. As part of the divorce settlement, Diana was stripped of her royal title, Her Royal Highness, and instead became known as Diana, Princess of Wales. And on the 31st of August, 1997, Diana died in a car crash with her companion, Dodi Fayed, in Paris. There's more to come on the Martin Bashir Panorama BBC affair if the brother of Princess Diana has anything to do with it. And finally, in this week, on the 21st of November in 1974, 21 people died when IRA bombs devastated 2 central Birmingham pubs, also injuring over 180 others. The Provisional IRA planted the devices in the Mulberry Bush pub and the nearby tavern in the town. 6 innocent Irishmen were arrested and fitted up by the police for the bombings. The so-called Birmingham Six were released after 16 years in jail when their convictions were overturned by the Court of Appeal in May 1991. The real bombers, though known, have never been found. Another highly eventful and influential 7 days that shaped the way we are. Breaking news, we've just heard that the test and trace system has told tonight that the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to self-isolate. This is just breaking now. It's being reported by a number of UK broadcasters. Boris Johnson has gone into self-isolation. Turns out the PM had a meeting with Lee Anderson MP, who has now tested positive for coronavirus. It's understood he will carry on working from number 10 for the next 2 weeks. Wow, that's big news. Let's take a call from Washington. Michael, on US politics. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call.
Welcome, sir.
Yes, the elections in the United States, with regards to the whole thing is suspicious. Mm-hmm. The whole thing. Mm-hmm. There's a case right now in California, Raji Rab versus a whole list of people. He was running for Congress in 2018. And the defense, the people you're suing, DNC, whatever, insisted that these machines were not accessible And these machines have something to do with these, begins with a D. And they said, well, nobody has access to them. This was reported by the people at the Comcouch, Fiorella and Pasta and Johnny. And it turns out that the machines actually have a SIM card in them and had a SIM card in them. And then so the defense has to come back and say, yeah, court, I guess we were wrong about that. They're accessible. Well, a SIM card allows anybody to call into the machine and then to, and whatever they need to do.
It's pretty pathetic, isn't it, that the most powerful country in the world can't run transparent and reliable, dependable elections?
Exactly. And if you think about it, if you wanted to have a fair election, the platforms for putting in your information securely is already here. In banking software, you could list the candidates instead of the transactions. You could vote that way, and it would be tabulated immediately. It would be very secure, and there would be, 100% confidence that this is working because it's already working for banking, and they could do this.
Yeah.
But these machines, I hear, Gene Pirro interviewed Sidney Powell, the Trump campaign manager, Trump campaign attorney, that somebody associated with these machines, it said that these machines were marketed in other countries around the world. And why would they do that? And then she said that the information regarding these machines and their discrepancies were wiped off this is the other day she said this, wiped off the internet, just cleaned off just like they never existed. What I see, I don't trust this. The history, obviously, of this the DNC participation in they tried to remove Trump from some false Russia hoax thing. Then they tried to impeach him. The whole thing, you put the whole picture together. This is, I try to believe in honest people doing, good things. But you know what? It's not happening. I think this election is rigged. That's my opinion, but I think it's, and you can rig this. If you do the machines to call into the SIM card, you can change over 100,000 votes.
Well,
you could do that easy.
The allegation is far more than 100,000 votes, but 100,000 votes across the narrowest contests would give the election to Trump.
What I was saying was you could change. What meaning was you could trick over 100,000 votes without any suspicion at all.
Well, especially when you get a raft of results in which Trump does not gain one single vote, whilst in two cases, well over six-figure numbers of votes for Biden, but Biden alone, not for any of the rest of the Democratic ticket, for Biden alone.
Right.
If that's not suspicious, I'm a banana. Michael, thanks. Very powerful call. Let's take a 60-second break. Call me. Come and have a go. If you think you're hard enough, don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year of 2020, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the people who work there? Have you looked at the global
I know nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But
I'm not
because you don't know
about
them.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Yeah, it's official. Boris Johnson is self-isolating after NHS Test and Trace informed him he'd been in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19. Wow. So the Prime Minister's spokesman, whoever that is now, maybe it's Carrie Simons, said he will follow the rules and is self-isolating in Downing Street, where he will continue to work. Let's take Craig from Glasgow on Boris Johnson. Go ahead, Craig.
Hi, George. Cheers for having me on.
Welcome. Welcome.
Listen, I think he's an absolute embarrassment, frankly. I think when you look at, first and foremost, I shed absolutely no tears over the departure of Dominic Cummings. He should have left in May. He should have been sacked at that point when he was clearly flouting lockdown rules and undermining the very rules he was seemingly helping the Prime Minister right to tell all of us to follow in his television conferences. I think the fact that Boris didn't do that, and now we're in a situation where Cummings has sort of decided to leave in effect.
I think he was sacked. I think he was sacked.
Oh, well, then that's to me even worse, because if Boris can sack him now, why didn't he sack him in May? This is the problem. A lot of people were thinking, well, what does Dominic Cummings have on Boris? When he was doing that pitiful press conference that he did, Dominic Cummings, which was one of the worst things I've ever witnessed in his 3/4 of an hour of my life I'll never get back. I just think Boris is too weak to actually stand up and run anything himself. That's why he listens to people, used to listen to people like Dominic Cummings, and why he lets people like Michael Gove and Carrie Simons make decisions for him, because he is not, in my view, competent enough to make those decisions. And don't get me wrong, I think it is, I don't see why the Prime Minister's girlfriend, Carrie Simons, should be allowed to determine what positions he puts people in. Why she should have a say in that, it is beyond me. But like I say, that is simply
You're obviously not a married man, Craig.
Well, no, but, if I was married and I was the Prime Minister of the country, then I'm afraid, the wife would have to come second. At least anybody with a backbone or a spine would do that. We know that Boris doesn't, and I do think he's fast approaching time up. My only worry is whoever replaces him.
Well, I'm going to infer that you're not a Conservative supporter. So what if the Conservatives replace him with somebody better?
Well, I mean, who's
will that be good? Will that be good for you?
No. As long as the Tories are in power, that'll never be good for me. The issue is, of course, that the Tories will remain in power until Labour can get their affairs in order and mount a proper challenge. And I do think Starmer has certainly done a better job of that than Corbyn was, to a degree. But Labour, for me, are still nowhere near capable of ousting the Tories in an election, which is a sad turn of affairs when someone like Boris Johnson is in charge.
Well, someone like Boris Johnson is in charge. Thousands of our people are dying every week, and Keir Starmer is miles behind the Tories in the polls.
Well, exactly, which is, doesn't surprise me in some ways, but in other ways it does, because he's clearly more competent than Boris. I mean, every single week, when you listen to the two of them go head-to-head at the dispatch box, Starmer quite clearly wins the majority of those exchanges, because Boris seems to have this block that he just cannot answer a simple question with a simple answer, and has to repeat himself over and over again to play to what he thinks. And that's the tragic thing about Boris. When he comes to his back benches and he's saying these things, he thinks, these are my supporters. They're really not. A lot of these people have got the knife out, sharpened and ready to stick in his back at the first opportunity. None more so than Michael Gove, who has already put a knife in Boris's back once before. So the fact he would trust him again, is insanity. But in fairness, I think if Michael Gove took over, I think we're finished. That is not the man to be in number 10 Downing Street. It just simply isn't.
Craig, good call. Thanks for it. Hal is in Pennsylvania. On the same subject, though. Go ahead, Hal.
Yeah, that's me. Can you hear me, George?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, my question was about Boris Johnson's advisors. It seems like Jeremy Corbyn, who a lot of his advisors were sidelined, his top advisors, Seamus Milne, people like that. Now it seems like Boris Johnson is ousting the people who really posed any challenge to the establishment or claimed to, like Dominic Cummings. And I was wondering, because she was considered a member of the Vote Leave faction, Munera Mirza is still technically in Downing Street, but there was also rumors that she was going to be moved to the Lords. Just who's running these places? It seems like Boris Johnson's going soft and wobbly, like you were saying, like in terms of his Brexit stance.
Hal, you know a lot about the internal court politics in 10 Downing Street, all the way in Pennsylvania. Very, very good points indeed. The sidelining of advisors, the dance, the choreography of advisors coming and going and briefing against this or that person, stabbing this or that person in the back, is of course age-old and evergreen. This will not be the end of it. It's wonderful that you are paying so much attention. I take my hat off to you. Hal, thanks for the call. Rory is in Belfast. Go ahead, Rory.
That's me.
Yeah.
George, what a pleasure to speak to you again. I actually spoke to you briefly last week.
Okay, sir.
And again, pleasure to speak to you. A couple of pertinent points. Been really enjoying the show as always.
Thanks.
Your poll, which of course can be taken seriously and so on, or there could be a bit of a tongue and a bit of a cheek there. With the results, for sure, I think some voters must have been voting with a bit of tongue in cheek. Simmons to run the country? I mean, certainly not. None for me, George. None on those lists, or even any of those touted recently as the leaders. Those like Cummings and so on. And Sunak and so on. None of these individuals at all run the country. In fact, even as a group, they do not at all. This is my belief, and I'll ask you for your opinion. I'd love to hear it in a second.
Who do you think then is running it?
What I put to you is that each and every single government since, let's say, Blair Brown before, has pushed the identity politics to sow division and so on and so forth, to distract from the fact that the real who runs the country, for me, for you, for the people on the street, is the tax evading corporations who really do run the show. And that trickles right down into our society. No individual or even party or government runs this country, the UK or the US. I put it to you, George, right now, pal. Sorry. We are living by governments by proxy. Thus, you can look at every single decision made by this Tory lot in London, the pandemic, for example, those millions of contracts awarded to companies that were registered within hours before of tendering of the contract, I'm sure you're well aware of, or do you speak on, whether it's Grenfell, how much money was the lives of the citizen in Grenfell Tower worth? This was a few £1,000s saved by a company worth, I don't know, hundreds of millions at the very least. I just put it to you, George, that this country's being run, yes, and it's being run into the ground.
Well, look, much of what you said I agree with, but I can't go all the way with you, and I could answer you with just one word: Brexit. The vast majority of the biggest corporations, in fact, all of the biggest corporations in Britain, and all of the biggest banks in Britain, all of the tops in the business class were against Brexit, but we got Brexit. And so there are limits to the power of these corporations, these financial interests. Last word to you.
Last word to me. Thank you very much for that. I really had a bit of a quick quote in mind. George, right now the world is beyond division, all across. Victor Hugo, a quote I love, "No army can withstand the strength of an idea whose time has come." Now, I just put that to you as somebody on the left, somebody who's, impassioned, and certainly a lot of that passion's come from you. And I would like to repeat it: no army in the world can withstand the strength of an idea whose time has come.
Wonderful.
Let's take them down, George. Let's take the corporations down.
Wonderful words, Rory. Victor Hugo doesn't get quoted on many radio stations or television stations in Britain or America, but he has been gloriously this evening. Let's take Sarkar in Glasgow on the same subject. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. Fantastic show as usual.
Thank you.
George, I have a small question, basically. I must say I've been very disappointed, not just, with the way the COVID has been managed. Now, I've been seeing the circus which is going on with the sacking or being throwing out of Dominic Cummings from number 10. Now, I'll be honest, I voted for Brexit, and I also voted, to make sure somebody gave us a sensible Brexit. Dominic Cummings was, the man who was guiding, Boris with all the principles. Now with him leaving, I don't know what will Boris do for the rest of his tenure, because I know, as one of your previous callers just a few minutes ago told, how Michael Gove is so much eyeing up the job. What could be the possible impact of this? And remember, Nigel Farage is trying to come back in the game. He sacrificed his seats so that the Tories could win some of the red wall seats. He's not too happy with Boris because he's going soft on Brexit. What could be the ramifications for the rest of his 4 years as Prime Minister?
Well, it's a good point that you make about Farage coming back. He's ready to pounce on any shortcomings in the Brexit settlement. Michael Gove is a far, far more competent governor than Boris Johnson is. He's more clever than Boris Johnson. Johnson's full of classical education, but Gove is a far more practical guy. And if he takes over, he'd make a better fist of it for the Tories. So if you don't like the Tories, you better hope he doesn't come to pass. Thanks for the call, Sarkar, as always. Thomas is in London on the same subject. Go ahead, Thomas.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Thank you for taking the call.
Welcome.
So I'm really calling up to pick your brains on RCEP and Asia Pacific trade deal, and really I just wanted to see what you think with regards to this being a symbol of power shift to the east, and if we might have something to learn in the Brexit negotiations with regards to free independent nation states coming to free trade agreements. So there's no court of justice, no requirements for common foreign policy, no objectives of a federal superstate. So I just really wanted to see what your thoughts are on that, and
well,
whether we might.
Very good call, Thomas. A new caller too, a very good one. The TTP is back on. Biden is interested in reviving it, and that will indicate a turning to the east by the new American government. But I've got to tell you that despite Pompeo's bullying and bludgeoning of countries like Indonesia not to get closer to China, it has completely failed. And the ASEAN region, which is what this pivot to the east would be the target of, the ASEAN region is now China's biggest trading partner, more than America, more than Europe, more than anywhere else. ASEAN is its biggest market, its biggest trading partner. So I think they're too late, that China is off and running, and nothing that they can do will stop that. I myself am not a supporter of trade deals. I think that the British people would have been the loser from a Trump trade deal. I'm in favor of being able to trade with anybody in the world that we like. I'm in favor of a British foreign policy that isn't told what to do by any other power, neither Europe nor the United States of America. I want to be an automatic friend to all and an automatic enemy to none. I believe in sucking it and see if a country is prepared to trade with us on the basis of mutual benefit, then I'm happy to trade with them. And I'm worried about the deal that Boris Johnson, from his isolation, is going to do this week. I'm worried about it from the point of view of fishing. I'm worried about it from the point of view of state aid. Imagine, it's the so-called social democratic EU that is demanding of the conservative British government that they do not give state aid to ailing industries, or for that matter, industries struggling to be born. Who'd have thunk it? That's the reality of the EU. Nothing social democratic about it at all, and never has been. Well, we'll have lots of calls and a new poll in the last hour of the show, after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Donald Trump has said for the first time that President-elect Joe Biden has won the US election, but he went on to allege it was only because the election was rigged. Trump went on to make his now familiar litany of allegations over the handling of the election. It was, however, a significant acknowledgement from the president, who, despite losing the Electoral College by 74 and popular vote by 5 million, has refused to accept the result. In a later tweet, he said, "I concede nothing. We have a long way to go." Ireland is warning that a no post-Brexit trade deal with the European Union will be struck if the UK pushes on with a plan to break international law. Tensions have ratcheted up following comments by senior figures in both governments ahead of another crucial week for negotiations. Ireland's Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said that should British Prime Minister Boris Johnson persist with trying to override parts of the EU divorce deal, then a new treaty on the future relationship will be off the table. But a senior minister in the UK confirmed that Johnson will stick to his plan and keep the controversial parts of the draft legislation in place. The talks between the UK and EU are due to resume in Brussels tomorrow. The impact of a new COVID vaccine will kick in significantly over the summer, and life should be back to normal by next winter, one of its creators has said. Professor Ugur Sahin, co-founder of biotech, also raised hopes that the jab could halve transmission of the virus, resulting in a dramatic reduction in cases. Last week, BioNTech and its co-developers Pfizer said preliminary analysis showed their vaccine could prevent more than 90% of people from getting COVID-19. About 43,000 people have taken part in tests. In a BBC interview, Sahin said he expected further analysis to show that the vaccine would reduce transmission between people as well as stopping symptoms developing in someone who has had the vaccine. The new drug, which was trialled in 6 countries, is given in 2 doses 3 weeks apart. A referendum on Scottish independence should not be held while the country heals from coronavirus, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has said. Brown said that the country was facing huge problems and should not hold a referendum. He said, "We are in the middle of a virus, we're in the middle of a recession." The SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, has said his party must plan for a referendum in 2021. Blackford tweeted that a vote for the SNP in the Scottish Parliament elections next year would be a vote for a second referendum on Scottish independence. He apologised for having to put off holding a referendum in 2020 as the Scottish Government had to focus on its response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but he insisted that a referendum would happen and must take place in 2021. However, Gordon Brown said that the country needed time to heal before any divisive, conflicting referendum that will cause consternation in Scotland for months and months to come. Space agency NASA and its private launch services provider SpaceX are preparing to send 4 astronauts to the International Space Station. The crew will ride to orbit in a Dragon capsule atop a Falcon 9 rocket. It will be only the second time that this launch system has been used to transport people. It follows a successful demo flight conducted back in May, which marked the resumption of astronaut missions from US soil after a gap of 9 years. The launch is due in Florida at 7:27 local time tomorrow. It's what's known as an instantaneous launch window, meaning the mission must leave on the button if it wants to catch the station as it circles the Earth overhead. Tigray's leader has admitted that it fired missiles at the capital of neighbouring Eritrea in another escalation of the fighting in Ethiopia. Earlier, at least 3 rockets appeared to have been aimed at the airport in the Eritrean capital, Asmara, hours after the Tigray regional government warned it might attack. The attacks on an international target represent another dangerous escalation of the conflict in one of Africa's most populous nations after fighting broke out on November the 4th. On Saturday, 2 other rockets were reported to have hit Ethiopia's Amhara state after earlier allegations of attacks on reportedly ethnic Amhara people in Tigray. And finally, drumming phenomenon Nandi Bushell can't embark on a world tour right now. The pandemic aside, she's 10 and still in primary school. And besides, it's not very rock and roll to tour with your parents as chaperones and a backpack full of homework. She has, however, embarked on an internet friendship with Dave Grohl, the frontman of the band Foo Fighters. The two, separated by decades of experience, have repeatedly squared off online in an ongoing drum battle. And now Grohl has written a song about her and her precocious talent. Nandi from Ipswich performed several covers of Foo Fighters hits on her YouTube channel and challenged Grohl to a drumming duel in August. Grohl accepted the challenge and used his daughter's drum set so they'd perform on kits of the same size, jamming to the Foo Fighters classic Everlong, and in response he challenged her to play Dead End Friends by Them Crooked Vultures. Nandi was more than up to the task, so Grohl, who has 3 daughters of his own, conceded the victory to her. "I've got something special for you," he told her in his latest video, released just days ago. "Something you've never heard before, something I've never heard before, because I'm about to write this off the top of my head for you," he said. Grohl accompanied himself on electric guitar, bass and drums, unleashed his original song Nandi with his daughters on background vocals. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, here's the second poll. I told you earlier, New Labour under Sir Keith Starmer are going to propose in the week that anti-vax arguments be banned from social media. Now, you know my views on anti-vax propaganda. You know my views on vaccination. They were in the short that we played earlier in the show. But I am against this New Labour plan for 2 reasons. One is the obvious, that banning other people's arguments is very rarely the right thing to do democratically in terms of freedom of speech. And if you live by that particular sword, then you yourself might be slain by it. But the second, more practical reason why I'm against this New Labour policy is because I can think of nothing that would give the anti-vax brigade more of a blast of support than the state banning anyone seeing or hearing their point of view. So, do you support New Labour's plan to ban anti-vax arguments from social media? A, yes. B, no. C, don't know. Get voting now on my Twitter feed. Now, the coronavirus hasn't gone away, you know. Nearly 3,000 British people died this week, and another 3,000, if we're lucky, and it's not 4,000 or more, will die this coming week. This is quite a rate of attrition. Already some 80,000 excess deaths have occurred in the year 2020, and it isn't over yet. The vaccines are coming on strong. Let's see if our doctor, Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, sees any cause for optimism. Dr. Brar, thank you very much for coming again to our aid on this. First of all, what's your reaction to the current rate of infection in Britain and in the United States and the current rate of death?
Thanks, George. Pleasure to be back with you. One day I hope we can discuss a slightly less macabre subject. We will. I'm absolutely confident that the world will move beyond this point, but for the time being, coronavirus, as you say, is very much still with us. At the moment, we are seeing new records being set all over the world. So in the world now, test-proven cases have reached 54.6 million. They're up this week by 3.6 million, and that's the largest rate of increase over a single week that we have had since the inception of the pandemic. The USA now has reached 11.3 million cases, and that represents an increase of over a million, 1.1 million in a single week, George. Their death rate being 250,000, having exceeded it, and the death rate in the world, 1,320,000. Closer to home in the United Kingdom, test-proven cases, we know we have 1.37 million. Many more people actually will have had the virus than that. As you say, the official numbers made the headlines of having topped 50,000, actually 52,000 now. But as you say, the excess death rate shows us that from the first peak alone, we actually were into the 80,000 figure. And again, we're likely to be into the excess death, excess mortality range again. So that figure, the true figure, we won't know for some time. Friday in the world, we had 661,000 cases worldwide in a single day. That's the largest number of cases per day. And Thursday in the United Kingdom, as I'm sure everyone's aware, we had over 33,000 cases. Probably that corresponds to the period just before the introduction of this lockdown. Nevertheless, it's a very large rate. And if you look at the antibody and random testing studies, they probably show that there's likely to be 100,000 people a day still becoming infected, though that data lags a bit, and the effect of the lockdown and restrictive measures that we've had throughout the country are not absolutely clear at this stage, George.
That's what I was going to ask you next. Is this lockdown working?
So we haven't really got evidence that it's working so far. The north of Ireland, the 6 states of Ireland, counties of Ireland that make up Northern Ireland, have had a decrease in their rate, but they had a prolonged lockdown and earlier on than the rest of Britain. Other areas, the northwest, which still has the second highest rate of infection, is on the decline in terms of its number of cases. Every other region of England remains on the increase. Northeast, Yorkshire, Midlands, particularly high, but actually southwest has the highest rate of increase, and the south of England and London are all increasing in terms of their numbers. So at the moment, there's a steady increase. There's a steady increase, as you say, in deaths, so that there have been more than 4,000 deaths over the last 2 weeks. This last week, 2,878 deaths. The week before, 2,333. And our hospital admissions are again increasing, so that there are 14 to 1,500 admissions a day. And overall in hospital, we've got around 14,000 COVID patients who are admitted solely for the effects of the coronavirus in hospital at the present moment, George. So not evidence as yet of declining numbers, and not really strong evidence even of stagnating numbers. The numbers continue to increase.
And it's going to finish quite soon, the 2nd of December. I think it's scheduled to finish. What will have been achieved by it then? Are we just sort of playing for time, waiting for the vaccine?
I mean, if you look at, we've discussed this before, if you look at Neil Ferguson's initial model, the initial strategy of the government very much was herd immunity. And the concept then was simply to stop the huge numbers of cases overwhelming entirely the NHS, so that the lockdowns would be triggered by a certain rate of admission into intensive care, a certain number of people on ventilators, a certain admission rate. And it was clear that from that initial modelling, that would not stop the virus, that wouldn't suppress the virus, it would spread out the curve, and they were likely to see a similar number of deaths. The only things that could really stop the virus would be not just testing more and more people, but, as we've said ad nauseum, it sounds almost boring to say it again, but actually acting upon that data to actually socially isolate, to remove the people who have the virus from society, to support them, to look after them, to make sure they get the best medical care when they're well, to discharge them, but to isolate society from the virus. And we're not doing that. There's still evidence that only 5 to 10% of people who are actually getting a positive test are actually in a position to self-isolate because of their circumstances, because of their economic circumstances, because they know that they've got a test, because they're being reached in time, in a timely fashion in order to be able to do so, because they're in social circumstances that permit them to do so. So our response is inadequate in terms of the public health measures. And while, you mentioned the vaccine, I'm optimistic about that. Really, the measures which we have available to us are sufficient to tackle the vaccine. They're simply not been employed. They haven't been employed adequately. Instead, the focus of the government has very much been upon expensive white elephants, if you like, huge measures, funneling huge amounts of funds through the private sector, often to people who have questionable relationships with the Tory party themselves, but not actually into the NHS, and not empowering the health experts and public health experts to actually take control of the virus and protect us from it, George.
Finally, and I'm grateful to you as always, the vaccine. I think we have to give up on the British health service buying the Russian or Chinese vaccines, which have 92% efficacy in the Russian case, rolled out amongst tens, scores of thousands of people, not just in Russia. Hungary is buying it today. But we must, I suppose, accept that the British are not going to buy anything from Russia or China. So the Western one, when will it be here? And what do you say to people that argue it's rushed, that vaccines normally take years to be proven, and this one appears to be being rushed to market?
I have some sympathy with that. Even some of my colleagues have that feeling. I mean, it's a relatively new technology. So it's an RNA vaccine, which itself gives logistical problems. That means it has to be stored at -70, -80 degrees Celsius. It's gone into mass production already, despite the fact that really what we're looking at is the first interim analysis of a phase 3 trial. Safety data hasn't been published, and therefore I can't comment on it. Efficacy data is based upon a small number of patients, actually, so 90-odd patients who've actually contracted COVID within the trial. That's both in the arm who have had the vaccine and the arm that have not had the vaccine, and is comparing those two arms that they've come up with a provisional percentage, which probably means 8 or 9 patients who've had the vaccine have contracted the virus anyway, but more patients who haven't had. But if there are 44,000 patients in the trial, it's not absolutely clear. They haven't released their entire working and documentation for me to comment upon the data. Clearly, it's I'm happy that the vaccine seems to be efficacious. It's very difficult at this stage to say it should be rolled out on the kind of mass scale that it will be. Clearly, there's a pandemic and there's a pressured situation. There's a real need for the vaccine. Whether this one turns out to be the most efficacious and the most safe, it's hard to say. The preliminary data we have really is just reports from the companies saying that they are happy that it's safe, they are happy that it's efficacious, and we'll have to accept that at face value for the time being, bearing in mind, that that Pfizer is a huge multinational company which has a large record of misinformation and mis-selling drugs and all the rest of it. Those are inseparable from the nature of pharmaceutical industry that we currently have. That said, we all take their drugs on a day-to-day basis. I am hopeful that it's optimistic. It's difficult for me to say. I think that actually there's far more robust data which has been issued about the Russian and Chinese vaccines. As you say, there's far more robust numbers who have been through their trials, and they're being sold and used on a greater scale. So it certainly is a point of note to see the different approaches that our own media have had towards these two vaccines, given actually the data that's published in our own academic literature is more strongly in support of the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, than the BioNTech vaccine. But we will see over time how those figures pan out. it's also interesting to see that billions of doses could be in the process of production prior to results being published, and the clear kind of conflict of interest that generates within the company, who clearly aren't going to want to throw away 1.5 billion doses of medicine if it proves to be unsafe. I hope it won't. I hope it will prove to be safe. I hope this and the other 11 major trials will bear fruit. It seems to me that the relatively older technologies are more useful in that you don't have to store them at minus 70 degrees Celsius. They are stable at room temperature. That will make them more accessible for a large portion of the world. But really, George, the final verdict is not yet in. I hope it's efficacious, but more than that, I can't really say without having access to the data.
And when, Doctor?
Well, it's $1 million question. So we've been promised 40 million doses. 40 million doses have been bought by our vaccine czar, who is, again, another appointee of the Tory government. They haven't given a firm delivery date. It's expected that they'll be delivered this year with an increased production next year. But those timelines are very open-ended. And as I say, this really is a first interim analysis of a phase 3 trial. The rest of the data is not in, and I personally don't think it will be available this year. Having said which, even on a trial basis, they're beginning to roll it out via My Trust and other trusts, so they're making preparations for mass delivery prior to really the final results being in, on the basis that the company says it works and the NHS have bought it, or rather the government have bought it and the NHS will be instrumental in delivering it. So I think we are gearing up to start giving it. Exactly how that will pan out over the next few weeks, we'll have to see. But yeah, as I say, we'll have to just watch the data as it's actually released.
Grateful as always. Thank you very much. Moats Medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. Much appreciated. Here's my second poll. Do you support New Labour's plan to ban anti-vax arguments from social media? A, yes, 15%. B, no, 80%. C, don't know, 5%. Let's take a call from Scott in Glasgow. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes, hello, George. Hi. I would like to talk to Dr. Brar. Obviously, he's gone now, I think. I disagree with you.
No, he's still on the line. He's actually still on the line, Scott. Go ahead.
Very good. Right, well, I disagree with you when you said you don't mind what vaccine you take, whether it be the Pfizer one or the Sputnik 5 one. Because
it's not that I don't mind, it's that I will take it if that's the only one available.
Well, this is where I disagree. Now, the old vaccines, so like a surrogate vaccine, they call it, where you might be given an inert bit of typhoid or so, then hopefully you get the immunisation against it for when the main one comes. All vaccines work like that, as I understand. These new RNA or messenger RNA vaccines, they've never been administered before on any wide scale. They actually use your own DNA or RNA as a messenger. You don't get a part of a vaccine. What you get genetically modified, in effect. Now, Pfizer were recipients of the biggest fine in history, corporate fine in history. 1986, the vaccine laws in the US made companies immune to prosecution. We've got Sir Michael Rawlings. He's the chair of the MHRA, Medicines Regulatory Body. He's chairman also of Biobank, funded by GSK, funded by Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, in collaboration with Sanofi, top 5 in the world's prescription sales. This is who regulates us. So the pharmaceutical company, through the MHRA, are regulating themselves, in effect. So my question to Dr. Brar is, do you trust a vaccine to genetically modify humans? Now, a lot of companies, and they rightly so, say half foods do not contain GMO, but they want us to be genetically modified now. What say you?
Doctor?
Kind of a few different points there, and some of them are quite... I think this comes back to your poll and the point you were making, George. I think it would be absolutely fundamentally wrong to enforce this vaccine or any other medicine or any other treatment upon the general population. I think that's incredibly unlikely. I think people have a right to their belief, and if they fervently don't want, just as a Jehovah's Witness from me will not accept a blood transfusion in hospital, I think it would be incredibly wrong to enforce vaccination, medication upon people who are not willing to take it if they want to take their chances. I think that's absolutely reasonable, especially when we come back, back to the virus and we say, look, the death rate of the vaccine is in the region of 1%. It's low. It only becomes a massive problem for the world because of how infectious and how many people will get the virus. So, for the elderly population, they will have a different appreciation of their risk. For the diabetic population, the cardiovascular population, they'll have a different appreciation of their risk. And so they will more likely and more readily take up the vaccine. The question of whether so it's true the mRNA vaccine is relatively new. There's nothing new about mRNA. mRNA is something that our bodies produce all the time. There'll be mRNA in every fruit that you eat and every piece of meat that you eat. There's nothing unusual about mRNA. What this mRNA, so messenger RNA is the code which is passed from your own DNA to the ribosomes in your cells, which make proteins. So it's how the blueprint turns into the proteins that cause the structure and the function of life to carry on within your cells and within your body. There's nothing new in that. And so rather than giving a protein, which is a piece of the virus that your immune system will recognize, generate antibodies to, and then fight the virus, this is one step removed. As giving the messenger RNA, which your cell will then manufacture the spike protein, and then you'll get an antibody to it. So it's not really a massive leap in the dark. I don't think it's dangerous in that respect, but it is a new technology. There are problems with the way in which it's stored. We do need to see how it works, check that it works, check there aren't side effects. I think that is unquestionably true, and all of these vaccines are on an accelerated program because there's an existential risk. So I don't have a problem. We're not being genetically modified by doing this. That's not true to say. It is a way of manipulating our immune system, but then every medicine is a way of manipulating our biology to produce a positive health outcome. So I don't have a problem with the technology in itself, other than the fact that it's new, and therefore we are less confident in predicting that it will definitely work and it will definitely be safe, and that needs some time. Whereas some of the other viruses, the Russian virus is an adenovector virus, so this is a technology that they have perfected in dealing with filoviruses and in dealing with Ebola, for example. It's something that they know works, and that technology, and they're adapting it to this disease. And similarly, giving an inactivated a virus is a technology that we've been using for 50 years and more, and we know again that works, and that's the technology that Chinese are using for 2 or 3 of their vaccines, which again have very high safety profile, and we have more information about them. So it's not that we're being genetically modified, but I do have concerns that it's being rushed, and it's a new technology, so we don't know it will work, and we don't know its safety profile.
Doctor, because I'm keen not to defame anyone, of course, I have to be. What about the points that Scott made about the regulator? He had some powerful, if true, words to say about the regulator. So I didn't hear exactly what he said about the regulator. I think he was saying that basically saying they're creatures of the pharmaceutical and finance capital swamp. Yeah, well, look, we live in this world, so everything about housing is produced by giant multinational corporations in ways which are unethical, with technologies that perhaps are not always the best. We all live in houses. We all need the products that they provide. So shoes are made by this giant multinational swamp. So all production, technology, all profit comes to a very few individuals, a small group of billionaires we know are overwhelmingly in control of the productive process of mankind. They're our bosses. They own the capital that owns the companies that employ us to do our jobs. Nevertheless, they produce a large array of medicines. I think there are serious concerns at some times that some medicines are produced, are rushed, that some trials are unethical, and a large amount of that comes back to a conflict of interest between the need for those companies to make a large amount of money and their need for them to deliver effective medicines that work. There are a large number of professionals who would swear by their integrity, their trials, just the process of where funding goes, what science is pursued and what science isn't. All of this is subject to the process of being filtered through the need to make money for corporations. And it's unquestionably the case that
a certain amount of connection exists between lobbyists, between companies, between government and business. We've seen that again this week when we've seen George Passmore Watson, who is a lobbyist who's been appointed as a secretary.
Sun columnist.
Absolutely, yeah, a political editor, I understand, of the Sun.
Yes,
who's
political
been appointed,
editor, yeah.
Yeah, who's been appointed, closely for the last 6 months. Has been very much embedded with Matt Hancock, the health minister. They haven't said Matt Hancock, they've said the health minister. I presume it's Matt Hancock. And has been passing information about the direction of government policy, has been selling it on to businesses. So there's a corrupt relationship that exists between business, between government, and between, large business, large science, large corporations, medicine. Yes, despite all of that, humanity needs medicine. They nevertheless have to produce products which are useful to humanity, and it's for us to watch what's happening there. As long as we're living within this system, that's something we have to live with. I don't think it's a reason that we should stop taking all medicine, paracetamol or digoxin or even new medicine. So, of course, this system in many ways is antisocial, and the way it plays out are antisocial. I don't think that's a reason for us to discard, all modern science.
No, quite so. Thanks, Scott. Stay on the line if you would, Doctor, if I'm not testing your patience too much. Abdullah in Milwaukee has a question along the same lines. Abdullah, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I have a question regarding, I should say, the safety of the vaccine.
Yeah.
From what I read, is that generally it takes 10 years to develop a vaccine, through all the trials and whatnot. However, this vaccine is being developed extremely fast. So how can we be certain that this won't have any long-term consequences?
I think Dr. Brar has actually answered that earlier, but rather than my paraphrasing him, I'll allow him to paraphrase himself. Doctor?
I think it's a really reasonable question, okay, and I think the concerns are legitimate, and as I say, they're shared by, I had a conversation with some of my colleagues who themselves say they feel a bit unsure about taking the vaccine. People are asking me, should they take the vaccine or not? The bottom line is, probably, if a vaccine becomes available, I'm likely to take it. I'm likely to read the papers first. I'll have patients who, when I offer them a procedure, will have read very widely in the literature. Other patients, when they come to me, will just take my advice. And, I'm on the end of the spectrum where I will read the literature widely and I'll do my best to appraise the data as it's presented. I do think that whoever produces a vaccine that goes to be used on a mass scale has to show very clearly that it is safe and efficacious, because there's a large number of the population who just simply don't need to take it. I think if you're in the low risk groups, I wouldn't ask my children to take it. I am the kind of age where I'm borderline, but I probably have already had it, and I'm not in a desperate need of it. But I think my father, I would encourage to take. My mother, I'd encourage to take. My elderly relatives and those who are infirm, I'd encourage to take it if we can show that it's relatively efficacious. I take the flu vaccine every year. I have no problem with vaccination in general, and the flu vaccine is generated each year based on the pathogens we think are circulating. Sometimes it's not very effective, sometimes it is, but I haven't had flu for some time. So overall, I'm likely to recommend that unless I have very serious concerns based on the data that is published by companies, to take it. Of the vaccines that I've seen so far, I would be very happy to take the Sputnik vaccine. I would be very happy to take a number of the Chinese vaccines. I haven't yet seen the data for this vaccine. It's likely to be that this is the one that is rolled out first. It's likely if the AstraZeneca vaccine passes through its phase 3 trial, that will also be rolled out. I think overall, I would recommend my own family who are at risk to take the vaccine, but I don't think people who are at low risk necessarily need to do so.
One more, Doctor. I promise you it's the last one. Thank you, Abdullah in Milwaukee. Welcome, Nicola in Swindon. Go ahead, Nicola.
Good evening to you, George.
Good evening.
I don't know whether you've heard of this, but a friend of mine has told me that her mother is in hospital, and I don't want to give you this friend's name on air or the name of the hospital for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But on 2 occasions recently, doctors have tried to force her mother to sign "Do Not Resuscitate" forms.
Shameful.
Now, a mother's in with a virus, but not COVID, but not a virus, an infection. But it's not COVID. It's another infection. Her mother is actually on the road to recovery. But you can imagine the shock to my friend that doctors forcibly woke her mother up and shoved this form in front of her and wanted her to sign it.
Okay, Nicola, just because of the hour and because I've kept Dr. Brar a long time, Doctor, this is something that we read and hear about all the time. I must tell you, nothing could be more anathema to me than people being asked to sign do not resuscitate notices, especially old people, especially people who are in distress, who are ill, might be confused. For me, this is a slippery slope to the euthanasia society. How would you respond to Nicola?
Yeah, it's interesting, George. So I have two kind of approaches to it. So one is I totally understand why no one would ever want to be told, you should sign this form. However, there are a number of medical circumstances, and I see it in my practice all the time, where we know people are so unwell that we're doing our best to perhaps treat them to a certain level, but their body is not responding. And if we think that essentially we're failing to cure them of a condition, that they have essentially a terminal illness. So this is one scenario I'm painting. I'm not talking about COVID here, okay? Then there are situations in which it's extremely undignified if someone essentially is to die, to have an attempt at resuscitation, which we know in advance will be futile. Now, if the patient's in that position, the healthcare professionals understand it, and the patient and the patient's relatives understand it, appreciate it, and agree, then I think there are circumstances in which those are extremely useful directives and lead to a dignified end of life. However, that's one thing. And so, while I understand your point of view, there are situations in which I think they're extremely useful adjunct to good medical care and good end of life care. Just say that to begin with. That said, it was of concern to me that initially, when the virus was spreading around February and March, when we were making very little provision, and really the provisions that I thought should have been made was creating separate hospitals, facilities, clinics, fever clinics, call them what you will, where we look after people who have this very infectious virus, give them the best care possible, to keep them separate from the vulnerable groups, to keep them separate from the care homes, to keep them separate from the hospitalized population, to keep them away from the elderly population and the general population. So to use the best public health measures possible, whilst developing more effective medications and medical approaches. While that wasn't being done, while the NHS continued to be starved of resources, while cases were growing, and whilst our hospitals began to see more and more people on mechanical ventilation and a large death rate, rather than an introduction of a really effective healthcare measures that could deal with the virus, rather than adequate PPE protection for our staff to stop them spreading it from person to person and contracting it themselves. And we know 600 medical personnel succumbed in the first wave, and care personnel. Rather than see all of that, there was an emphasis on issuing, if you like, the concept of triage, the concept of those patients who were not likely to survive COVID and therefore who could not get ventilation. And I think, again, it's another thing that 2-3 weeks back, the Sunday Times again published an article on, which was worth reading, in which there were pressure, essentially directives that came from government to the profession and were disseminated throughout the profession, encouraging a kind of triage process. Not every hospital took them up, but there was a pressure to accept a high level of triage as opposed to a high level of care, precisely because actually we had failed to act on Operation Cygnus of 2016. We had failed to expand hospital capacity. We had failed to expand ventilatory capacity. We know that patients who have COVID need a long period of time on the ventilator. They can make it through. Even the elderly can make it through. But they need a large amount of care, and because it wasn't possible, if you literally don't have enough resources to deal with the health burden, then you're forced as a first responder, as a healthcare system, to triage, to give the best care available to the people who are most likely to make it through. Of course, the best system is one which has enough capacity within it to meet the needs of the population, and which doesn't force its clinicians on the front line to make those desperately difficult, hard decisions and put them at odds with the patients they're trying to serve. But that needs an entirely different approach to the NHS. It means, that we've seen 400 billion go to companies in bailout. We've seen 43 billion Boris will send to the private sector for his moonshot. We've seen 12 billion already go to via Harding. Diana Harding to track and trace. We've seen 5.2 billion come on inadequate PPE. We don't know how many billion yet Kate Bingham is spending on the task force. But during this period, the NHS itself is starved of resources for the front line. And increasingly, the resources, they will always be able to show you an increasing budget going to the NHS, but that budget increasingly is going to subcontract it out, privatise services. It's happening now at an ever-accelerated rate. And so the real scandal of all this is not that some patients didn't receive the very best gold standard Donald Trump-style care. It's that we have been told that our government is protecting the NHS while all the time they are running it down in the face of this pandemic. And that does leave us in a situation where people who may be able to survive do not receive the care that they need in order to do so. Perhaps it's a bigger scandal that so many people are even being triaged and told to stay at home. We know there was a huge number of increase of home deaths of people who probably had COVID who never made it into the hospital for the same reason, George.
Well, we'll discuss the broader philosophical issue raised with this once we get past the coronavirus. But that was a fantastic answer. Thank you very much. Thank you to Nicola. Give me a 60-second break, why don't you?
Barnier said in his latest statement, despite the difficulties we face, an agreement is within reach, if both sides are willing to work constructively, if they are willing to cooperate.
Sacre bleu! 60 billion in les toilettes is the Maginot Line all over again. What shall we do?
We have got to get the Englanders of Treasure Island back on track and get them overpaying for our cars again.
My union friends, what shall we do? We are running out of options.
There is only one thing we can do, mon ami. What we do best.
Warning, warning. European Union reversing. Warning, warning.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Okay, let's get as many calls in as we can. Do you support New Labour's plan to ban anti-vax arguments from social media? Yes, 13, that's down to. No, 82% up to. And don't know, still at 5. Here's Luis in Plymouth on the coronavirus. Luis, welcome.
Good evening, George. I don't know if Ranjeet is still there, but hello to you too.
No, the doctor's gone. We took an hour nearly of his time, so thank you.
No worries.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
I wanted to comment on the anti-vaxxers, and I want everybody listening to be clear that vaccines are not the problem, that science is not the problem, but rather vaccines made for profit are the problem. That when private companies make vaccines in order to make profits, health is not in command, profits are in command. And that problem concerns the whole economy, not only vaccines. And that's the problem we face today, vaccines. And regarding Pfizer, it's great time to remember that Pfizer, you said it was also the Viagra creator, was one of the biggest sentences of fraud cases. Pfizer was sentenced to a 2.3 billion settlement case because of fraud. So would you inject a vaccine that was made by a fraud settlement company or by a Chinese company?
I would prefer not to. I would prefer not to. I'd prefer not to fly on Richard Branson's airline. I'd prefer not to do many things, but I live in this world, as Dr. Brar put it. My child, my latest child, 3 months old, she's just had all her vaccines. I don't know who made them. I know someone profited from them, but I trust my doctor, and I trust that my doctor would not inject my child with something that would harm her. Dr. Brar himself just told you that he has the flu vaccine, and it's worked for him. Doesn't work for everyone, but it's worked for him. I dare say, well, of course, someone profited from his flu vaccine, from my child's anti-meningitis vaccine, my child's anti-TB vaccine. But what can I do about that, Luis?
Absolutely. No, I was just commenting that regarding that. I would rather have, as you said, a Russian vaccine or Chinese
Me too.
vaccine.
I've asked the Russians to give me a vaccine. I said I'd take it here live on air.
Right.
But there are technical difficulties in giving their vaccine in Britain because the British authorities have not cleared it. Otherwise, you would have seen me taking it already, because I trust the Russians more than I trust Pfizer, more than I trust AstraZeneca.
Right. And regarding your poll on the new label
yes,
anti-vaccine censorship, but I think that's very concerning, because not because of the anti-vaxxers, but just because they are against the vaccines, that doesn't justify banning them. And my concern is that just because that's against the main narrative, we should ban them. Well, next year, they might as well ban your show because it's against the main narrative.
Exactly so.
And that's a problem.
Exactly so, Luis. Thank you very much. An excellent call. A couple of social media points. What are the chances of Dominic... That's a good one. Frederick says, what are the chances of Dominic Cummings being a late entry into I'm a Celebrity? Now, I bet they're on the phone to him right now. If they're not, they will be, having heard your contribution, Frederick. Dave says, I'm not against social media banning speech, but I believe they need to censor blatant, false and fake news. But who decides that, Dave? That's the problem. Terry says, Pfizer is just another corrupted corporation. Stephen says, free speech is under attack. We should be able to discuss the effects of taking an untested vaccine. Well, tell Keith Starmer, it's his law. Alex says, suppression of opinion and ideas is a bad thing. On the other hand, it's nigh on impossible to argue with some anti-vaxxers, and it's a dangerous conviction to hold and spread. And Dave says, reluctance to take a vaccination that has been rushed to market for a disease with a 99% survival rate is not being anti-vax. It's being a concerned citizen. I intend to avoid it for as long as possible. Well, of course, Dave, if you don't want to take it, then don't take it. Richard is in Georgia. Georgia in the United States, I'm guessing. Go ahead, Richard.
Yes, the Peach State, Georgia. Hi, George.
Very nice. Your state is going to be much in the news over the next 6 weeks.
It definitely is. I talked to you last week, George, about that, and I don't have much of a handle on how it's going to go. I did see one poll for the incumbent David Perdue was like 4 points ahead of John Ossoff, and given the shy Trump vote and all that, and the likely higher turnout of Republicans, I think he's quite likely to win, possibly by, for Democrats, a very disappointing large margin.
Well, that's what the bookmakers say, that both these Senate seats will be held by the Republicans.
I think so. I mean, I'm an old Democrat, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'm ready to leave. But I do think the Senate will be Republican. I think we'll lose both of those. I'll be voting for the Democrats because I want to vote against Mitch McConnell, the roadblock to progressive progress, as he'll still be leader of the Senate. And I would like to stop that, but I don't think we can. Yeah, I'm ready to leave the Democratic Party and join a People's Party and start moving now, not waiting till 2024. Too often, third parties just want to slap together a presidential race.
No, it has to be done now, Richard, now.
Yes. Why not build a party now? I like, in our country, I have an idea of calling it the Commonwealth Party. Socialist or socialism are incendiary words in America.
There's no need for that. Call it the People's Party, the Commonwealth Party. It's got to be a People's Party, whatever you call it.
Okay, I agree. Now, there are prejudices in this country, like I said, against the word socialist, and also peoples and workers commit to too many people on the far right. Of course, they're not going to vote for us anyhow, but that screams communism to them. But I am ready to go forward. I see the Democratic Party as pretty weak, and I'm fed up with Hillary Clinton. I did like Barack Obama till I've learned more and saw how he actually led and some of the policies. Certainly, he did not get us out of the Middle East. I call him Commander Drone. He loved to. He looked
nice in a tan suit. Richard, thanks for the call. Kurt is in Germany on the same subject. Kurt, go ahead.
I want to talk because we in Germany suffered because of Hillary Clinton, because she killed Gaddafi, and because of that all the refugees came to Germany, and because of that the whole Central Africa destabilized. And nowadays you can read it all in WikiLeaks about crimes she committed in Libya. That's her work. And now you hear Biden say that he wants to destabilize Turkey because he says it's a dictator. So we are very scared, actually, with Biden as a president, because if in fact Harris will be the president and she has the whole foreign specialist of warmonger Hillary in her team.
Exactly.
And in my opinion, the best president really would be Tulsi Gabbard, but she was called by that terrible woman, Hillary Clinton, a Russian asset.
Yeah, exactly.
And this woman, Tulsi Gabbard, she's a spiritual leader, she's a military leader, and a political leader also. And what has happened is terrible. So I really scared what is going to happen if Biden wins, because they will return together with the neocons to this counterproductive regime change war policy. When you look, I'm not for dictatorship, but what happened to Libya, it was a beautiful country. People were happy. The same people Macron wants to put in jail, Gaddafi's put in jail. Yeah, he killed them. Macron doesn't want to kill them, but the same language Gaddafi used, Macron is now using them. So it's terrible. So I don't understand why Americans love Hillary Clinton. She's a war criminal. I don't understand. They are white suits. They're nice suits, but they're war criminals when you look at it.
Well, look, Kurt, only because of the hour, I need to press on. But a very powerful call, and than's for making it from Germany.
Please, one thing. Please give attention to Tulsi Gabbard, because she's a war veteran. She was in
we all know her, but she backed Joe Biden when she got cheated out of the prize.
Well, she had to, but she is a very strong personality, and she should have.
Well,
I don't understand why Biden didn't choose her, because
he'll never choose her because she's against war. Kurt, thanks for that. Dale is in Surrey on China. Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, hi, George. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Welcome.
I want to talk to you about the sort of the Cold War that appears to exist now between China and the West, whether it be like the 5G banning of Huawei or the confrontation in the South China Sea. Now that Biden looks like he's going to be president, do you think the relationship will improve or even get worse? He seems to be more hawkish than even Trump.
No, I don't think it will improve. It probably won't get worse. I think Trump's increasingly unhinged attacks on China were leading in a very dangerous direction. The filling of the South China Sea, the clue being in the name, with American naval assets, the sale for the first time of cruise missiles to Taiwan, offensive capability for the first time, supposedly banned under American law. This was all headed in a very dangerous direction. Whether Biden, with a Republican Senate, having lost seats in the House, and with Trump breathing down his neck, will greatly improve the situation, I very much doubt, Dale. The Europeans are going to have to make their own minds up. Are they going to make an enemy of China themselves, with all the consequent economic damage that will do, or are they going to plough an independent course? I hope it's the latter, but I suspect it's the former. Thanks, Dale. Nikki is in France on Julian Assange. Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, George. I love your shows. I never miss an episode.
Thank you so much.
I'm calling about the Piccadilly arrests. The first lot was in October, and the second lot was in November. Now, in both cases, they had a permit to protest. The October arrest was one guy. Coincidentally, the second arrest involved people who ran to film the first arrest, so huge coincidence. In any case, I think this is a very dangerous turn of things. If they're arresting people who are supporting this great journalist who is also at great risk whilst in Belmarsh. He is immunocompromised. He has a lung condition. So although they won't allow protests of more than 2 people, they're happy to have an innocent journalist in jail at great risk.
Yeah, in a jail that's swirling with the coronavirus. A beautiful call, Nikki. I appeal to President Trump, if he's watching, if he's listening, I appeal to him to now drop the charges against Julian Assange. They are unwarranted, unjustified. You know they are, Mr. President. You know that Julian Assange's only offense was to expose the very swamp that you were unable to drain, and which is now threatening to subsume even you and your presidency. Nothing would better answer the swamp than a presidential pardon, a dropping of the charges on Julian Assange. Thank you, Nikki, for giving me the opportunity to say that. Brian is in Cornwall. Go ahead, Brian.
Hiya, George. Yes, I was just on about the diesel cars and that, what the government wants to do in that.
Yeah.
It very concerns me, to tell you the truth. And it also concerns me about what they're doing about the red diesel next year. Actually, I come from a travelling family in showman as well. And I was a showman for many, many years. And the way the showman's been treated through this pandemic as well, it's been absolutely disgraceful. Council's not letting them operate their rides and one thing and another. And now is a big hit now where they're going to stop the red diesel.
Yeah, Brian, I wish we had more time to discuss this. Unfortunately, we don't. But the threat to working people, whether directly or indirectly, people who drive for a living, people who need their cars to go and make their living, people who live in rural areas. I myself live in rural Scotland. There's no public transport can solve my transportation issues. I need my car. And I can't afford the Teslas and these super priced electric cars. And if I can't afford them, that means the majority of people in this country can't afford them. Neither can I be confident of the charging of electric cars. I can't even keep my telephone charged, never mind my motor vehicle. So I'm going to campaign against this. I'm going to make a rapid radio burst tomorrow on my Patreon page about it. Tune in if you can, Brian. But I've got to say bye to you because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I just wanted to tell you I had a nice surprise yesterday. We've got a little restaurant down the road. We haven't gone to it because we've gone locked down and we're not very mobile. So the owner and the chef and all his family called on us, and they delivered 2 large portions of his homemade soup, and they said they missed us and they hoped we were okay. Now, how nice is that?
It's fantastic. That's the kind of customer care that small businesses are famous for, and if they're sensible and keep doing so, they'll get to be bigger businesses in due course. What kind of restaurant was it? What was the name?
I think it's called Box E, which is a very funny name, but it's quite close to us, just not very far away.
Box E in Bristol.
Box E, yeah.
A big shout out to you. If you are in the business of takeaway in the Bristol area, then give your custom to Box E, who did a great thing by a legend and her husband of ours here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Thank you, Norma. The hour is done. It only remains for me to say that it's been marvellous for me, truly marvellous. I hope it was for you. An outstanding show, I thought it was. Huge engagement on social media and in the call rate. It is, I can confirm, the highest number of calls that we have ever had. More than 70 people were unable to get on the air, and a record number were able to get on the air, including several first-time callers. It's been great. Tell everyone about it. Thank you very much.